What if the greatest scientific discoveries of the ancient world weren't recorded in dusty scrolls or complex equations, but hidden within the very stories we tell our children? For centuries, we've looked at myths and allegories as simple tales of gods and heroes' colorful distractions from the serious work of history and science. But what if these narratives were actually sophisticated vessels for preserving humanity's earliest insights into the natural world? Imagine a time when sharing certain knowledge could be dangerous, when literacy was rare, and when the line between observation and imagination was beautifully blurred. In those moments, storytelling became more than entertainment. It became a vital technology for encoding truth. Today, we're going to unravel 29 ancient allegories that secretly charted the course of early science, stories that carried the seeds of astronomy, physics, biology, and ethics long before those disciplines had names. From the shadowy depths of Plato's cave to the sun-scorched wings of Icarus, these tales are far more than folklore. They are hidden maps of human curiosity, coded messages from thinkers who used metaphor to explore the boundaries of the known world. As we journey together through these narratives, you'll begin to see patterns emerge: the same questions about light and perception, the same wonders about flight and force, the same ethical dilemmas about knowledge and power that still occupy scientists today. This isn't just about revisiting old stories. It's about recovering a lost chapter in the history of ideas, one that reveals how our ancestors used the power of narrative to observe, question, and remember. By the time we reach the end, you'll never look at mythology the same way again, because you'll understand that these ancient allegories are among humanity's first and most daring experiments in understanding the universe. So settle in, open your mind, and prepare to see the familiar become extraordinary as we decode the hidden science within our oldest stories. Long before textbooks or peer-reviewed journals existed, knowledge was a fragile thing, precious, powerful, and often perilous to share. In a world where literacy was a rarity reserved for elites and speaking certain truths could be dangerous, how did groundbreaking ideas survive? The answer lies not in dusty scrolls hidden away, but in the stories told around fires, passed from parent to child, and performed in public squares. Allegory became the universal language of discovery, a sophisticated vessel designed to carry complex concepts safely across the treacherous terrain of time. Imagine a brilliant thinker in ancient Athens or Babylon, observing a pattern in the stars or a principle of leverage. To write it down plainly could be to invite ridicule from traditionalists or wrath from those in power. But to weave it into a story about a hero, a god, or a magical creature, that was not just safe, it was unforgettable. A narrative could travel farther and live longer than any individual. It could disguise a radical astronomical observation as a tale of celestial romance, or embed a lesson on the properties of sound within a myth about a musician who charmed the stones themselves. These stories were mnemonic devices on a cultural scale, packaging observations about the natural world in characters and plots that were easy to remember and retell. This wasn't a primitive form of science, it was a necessary and ingenious one. It allowed for the preservation of insights that might otherwise have been lost to conquest, censorship, or simply the slow fade of memory. A myth about a great flood found in countless cultures could encode generations of hydrological and geological observation. A fable about a turtle and a hare wasn't just a moral lesson about patience. It was a way to discuss relative speed, distance, and motion. The allegory acted as both a shield, protecting the knowledge within from those who might seek to suppress it, and a vehicle, ensuring it could journey through centuries to eventually find an audience ready to understand its deeper meaning. This is how the earliest scientists communicated, building a bridge between the emerging human drive to understand the universe and the timeless power of a well-told story. Plato's allegory of the cave isn't just a philosophical story, it's a powerful metaphor for how we come to know anything at all. Picture a group of people who have lived their entire lives chained inside a dark cave facing a blank wall. Behind them, a fire burns, and between that fire and the prisoners, puppeteers cast shadows onto the wall. The prisoners can't turn their heads. They've never seen the puppeteers or the fire or the entrance to the cave. All they have ever known are those flickering shadows. They name them, they discuss them, they believe these shadows are the full extent of reality. Then, imagine one prisoner is freed. He's forced to turn around to look at the fire and the puppets. It's painful, it's blinding, it's confusing. He's told that the shadows he thought were real are merely copies, and that these puppets are closer to the truth. He's then dragged further out of the cave and into the sunlight. After a period of intense pain and disorientation as his eyes adjust, he begins to see the world as it truly is. The vibrant colors, the real objects, and finally, the sun itself, the source of all light and life. He understands that his entire previous existence was a pale imitation of reality. Filled with compassion, he returns to the cave to tell the others. But down in the darkness, his eyes are now useless. He stumbles, he can no longer see the shadows as clearly as they can. They think his journey has ruined him, and they violently resist any attempt to free them, preferring the comfort of their familiar illusions. On the surface, this is a story about philosophy and enlightenment, but if you listen closely, you can hear the early stirrings of the scientific method. The prisoners represent anyone who accepts the world at face value, who trusts their senses completely. The journey out of the cave is the difficult, often uncomfortable process of scientific inquiry, questioning what seems obvious, seeking evidence beyond immediate perception. The sun represents the ultimate truth, the fundamental laws of nature that science strives to uncover, and the painful adjustment of the eyes, that's the cognitive struggle of abandoning a comfortable old theory for a more accurate, but more complex, new one. Think about the reaction of the other prisoners. This is a perfect allegory for the resistance new scientific ideas often face. When Galileo pointed his telescope at the heavens and argued the Earth revolved around the sun, he wasn't just sharing data, he was asking people to leave a very deep, comfortable cave. They couldn't feel the Earth moving, so they refused to believe it. They preferred the familiar shadow, the geocentric universe, to the blinding, revolutionary truth. Plato's Cave, written over 2,000 years ago, perfectly captures the core of the scientific spirit, a deep skepticism of appearances and an unwavering commitment to follow reason toward a brighter, truer understanding of the world, no matter how difficult the journey may be. Now, let's turn from the shadows of the cave to the brilliant, open sky, where another ancient story takes flight. The myth of Icarus is one we all think we know, a boy who ignored his father's warnings, flew too close to the sun, and fell to his doom as the wax holding his wings together melted. On its surface, it's the ultimate cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and overambition. But if we look closer, past the moral lesson, we find something astonishing, a detailed, albeit tragic, report on early aerodynamic experimentation. This isn't just a fable about hubris, it's a narrative encoding of physical principles, a story built around the stark limitations of materials and the unforgiving laws of nature. Consider the very construction of the wings. Daedalus, Icarus's father and a legendary craftsman, didn't choose his materials at random. He fashioned the wings from feathers and wax, a combination that speaks to a profound, intuitive understanding of the requirements for flight. Feathers are lightweight, flexible, and possess a structure that provides surface area for lift principles that would much later be defined by Bernoulli's principle. The wax was the binding agent, the adhesive holding the assembly together. The ancient storytellers, through Daedalus, are demonstrating a grasp of material science, the need for a strong but lightweight composite structure. The specific choice of wax is particularly insightful. It has a known and predictable melting point. The failure wasn't a random act of a capricious god. It was a predictable outcome based on the material's properties when exposed to a specific environmental condition, intense heat. This demonstrates an early form of engineering analysis, understanding that every material has its breaking point. The flight instructions given by Daedalus are equally telling. He famously warned Icarus not to fly too low, lest the dampness of the sea clog his wings, and not too high, lest the sun melt the wax. This is a primitive but brilliant articulation of operating parameters. It's an acknowledgement that a successful flight depends on maintaining a precise balance within a narrow band of environmental conditions. Flying too low introduces the problem of moisture and drag, which could increase weight and reduce aerodynamic efficiency. Flying too high introduces the problem of thermal degradation. This isn't just a father's worried advice. It's a proto-scientific manual outlining the critical variables of altitude, temperature, and humidity. The entire tragedy hinges on Icarus violating these set parameters, leading to a catastrophic systems failure. And then there's the fall itself, a brutal lesson in gravity. Icarus's exhilaration of flight, his feeling of power and freedom, is abruptly terminated by the most fundamental force in the universe. His ascent is stopped not by a divine command, but by a physical law. The melting wax is the trigger, but gravity is the executioner. The myth captures the immutable truth that human ingenuity, no matter how brilliant, must always operate within the constraints of nature's laws. The story doesn't say flight is impossible. It meticulously details why this particular attempt failed. In doing so, it preserves crucial data about lift, material limits, and environmental factors. Icarus's fall is one of history's first recorded engineering disasters, and like all such disasters, it provided a devastatingly clear lesson for those who followed. It reminds us that progress is often paved with failure, and that each tragic attempt contains within it the seeds of future success, teaching generations to come how to truly conquer the skies. Moving from the physical laws of flight to the ethical landscape of discovery, we encounter a story that probes the very heart of scientific responsibility. The myth of Pandora is far more than a simple warning about female curiosity, as it's sometimes crudely interpreted. It is a profound and deeply layered allegory for the concept of causality and the chain of unintended consequences that can erupt from a single, seemingly small action. Imagine Pandora presented with a sealed jar, often mistranslated as a box, and given one command: do not open it. Her curiosity, that most human of impulses, gets the better of her. The moment she lifts the lid, a torrent of miseries is unleashed upon the world. Disease, strife, envy, and every imaginable sorrow. She slams the lid back down, trapping only one thing inside: hope. This narrative operates on multiple scientific levels. On the most basic level, it's a story about cause and effect. The action of opening the jar is the cause, the release of suffering is the effect. But the ancient storytellers were illustrating something more sophisticated than a simple one-to-one relationship. They were exploring the idea of a cascading failure, a single point of intervention that triggers an uncontrollable and irreversible chain of events. Once the contents are released, they cannot be forced back inside. The knowledge is out, the discovery is made, and the world is irrevocably changed. This mirrors the fundamental principle in physics and philosophy that some processes are entropic. They move toward disorder and cannot be undone. This is where the allegory connects directly to the ethical dilemmas of modern science. Think of the moment the first nuclear chain reaction was achieved. a point of no return that unleashed the power of the atom. The scientists involved understood they were opening a jar of immense potential, both for energy and for devastation. They knew that once this knowledge existed in the world, it could not be unknown. The same ethical shadow falls across genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. A researcher using CRISPR technology to edit a gene sequence is, in a very real sense, opening a biological jar. The potential to eliminate hereditary diseases is the hope trapped inside, but the unintended consequences, the unforeseen edits, the ecological impacts of gene drives are the evils that rush out into the world, impossible to recall once they are set in motion. And this brings us to the most poignant and debated part of the myth, hope remaining in the jar. Is this a comforting ending, suggesting that even in a world of suffering, we still have hope to sustain us? Or is it a darker, more cynical conclusion? Some interpretations suggest that hope was also an evil, a false promise that leads humanity to endure suffering pointlessly. From a scientific perspective, this duality is perfectly captured. Hope is the driving force behind all inquiry, the hope for a better medicine, a cleaner energy source, a deeper understanding of the cosmos. It is the engine of progress, but blind hope, hope without caution and rigorous oversight, can be the very thing that leads us to open jars we are not prepared to handle. The myth doesn't provide easy answers. Instead, it presents a timeless ethical framework, a narrative warning that every act of discovery carries with it both a blessing and a curse, and that the true burden of science is not in the discovery itself, but in managing the world it creates afterward. Now, let's shift our focus from the ethical dilemmas of Pandora's jar to the raw, physical challenges faced by Hercules. His famous 12 labors present a fascinating allegory, not just for personal growth, but for humanity's earliest, most determined attempts to master the forces of nature itself. Each task assigned to the hero by King Eurystheus reads like a primitive research project, a specific, often seemingly impossible problem, drawn from the wild, untamed world that our ancestors were desperately trying to understand and control. Think of the Nemean lion, a creature with an impenetrable hide that could not be harmed by any mortal weapon. This isn't just a monster, it's a personification of an ultimate physical challenge, a problem that cannot be solved by brute force alone. Hercules' solution was one of brilliant improvisation. After realizing his arrows and club were useless, he used his immense strength to wrestle the beast and eventually strangle it. But the innovation didn't stop there. He then used the lion's own razor-sharp claws to skin it, creating a new, invulnerable armor from its hide. This labor perfectly encapsulates the scientific process, confronting a problem, observing its properties, testing conventional solutions, failing, and then devising a novel approach that uses the problem's own inherent qualities against it. It's a story about resourcefulness and adapting one's methods to the specific constraints of the challenge, a principle at the very heart of engineering and materials science. Perhaps the most strikingly scientific of all the labors is the battle with the Lernaean Hydra. This multi-headed serpent presented a unique and terrifying property. For every head Hercules cut off, 2 more would grow back in its place. This is a powerful metaphor for a whole class of scientific and medical problems where a direct, linear attack only makes the situation worse. Think of using a broad-spectrum antibiotic that wipes out beneficial gut bacteria along with the harmful ones, potentially leading to new health issues. Or consider pest control in agriculture, where eliminating one predator can allow a different, more resistant pest population to explode. The Hydra represents complex, adaptive systems that defy simple solutions. Hercules, with the help of his nephew Iolaus, finally triumphs by employing a multi-faceted strategy. As he sears each neck stump with a burning torch to cauterize the wound and prevent regrowth, Iolaus provides the crucial assist. This illustrates the importance of collaboration and the application of a secondary, supporting technique, in this case heat, to achieve a lasting solution. It's a story that predicts the need for combination therapies in medicine and systemic thinking in environmental science, reminding us that the most stubborn problems require more than just force. They demand clever, layered interventions. Other labors continue this theme of imposing human order on natural chaos through ingenuity. The cleaning of the Orjan stables, which housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned in 30 years, was a feat of civil engineering rather than brute strength. Instead of attempting to shovel the immense waste by hand, Hercules rerouted two nearby rivers, Alpheus and Peneus, to flush the filth away in a single mighty torrent. This labor is a clear allegory for the principles of hydrodynamics and large-scale sanitation. It celebrates the power of leveraging natural forces to accomplish a task efficiently, moving beyond manual labor to a systems-based solution. It's the mythological precursor to aqueducts, sewer systems, and public health initiatives. Similarly, his retrieval of the golden apples of the Hesperides wasn't a simple theft. It involved outwitting the 100-headed dragon Ladon and the Titan Atlas himself, who held up the sky. This quest symbolizes the pursuit of elusive knowledge, the golden apples of truth, which often requires navigating complex guardianship and renegotiating fundamental understandings of the world, much like convincing Atlas to temporarily shift his cosmic burden so the apples could be secured. Together, these 12 labors form a grand narrative of problem-solving. They are a mythological blueprint for the scientific method, celebrating perseverance, creative thinking, and the relentless human drive to not only survive in a chaotic world but to comprehend it, organize it, and ultimately master it. From the heroic struggles of Hercules, we now journey to the very dawn of recorded history, to a story that confronts perhaps the most fundamental of all human desires. The Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed on ancient clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, is more than a legendary adventure. It is a profound and deeply scientific inquiry into the nature of life itself. The narrative follows the powerful but arrogant King Gilgamesh of Uruk, who is shattered by the death of his beloved friend, Enkidu. This loss ignites a desperate, obsessive quest not for glory or treasure, but for the one thing that seems permanently out of reach: immortality. Gilgamesh's journey becomes a powerful allegory for humanity's earliest and most persistent scientific pursuit, the desire to understand, delay, and ultimately conquer death. His quest leads him to the ends of the known world, and along the way he gathers crucial data points. He seeks out Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, a mortal man who was granted eternal life by the gods after surviving a great flood. This encounter is packed with symbolic meaning. Utnapishtim represents a controlled experiment, living proof that immortality is theoretically possible, but under conditions that cannot be replicated. He is the exception that proves the rule, a single data point that offers hope but no practical pathway. His very existence suggests that the ancient storytellers were grappling with the idea of biological limits not as absolute decrees, but as problems that might have solutions, however elusive. The most striking scientific symbol in the entire epic appears when Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh of a secret plant that restores youth. Gilgamesh eventually finds this plant growing at the bottom of the sea, a thorny plant that pricks his hand like a rose. He retrieves it, triumphant, planning to take it back to Uruk to test it on the elderly first before using it himself. This is not mere magic, it is a detailed allegory for ancient pharmacology and botany. The plant of rejuvenation is a perfect metaphor for the countless real-world herbs, roots, and compounds that early healers and proto-scientists would have discovered and experimented with in their search for remedies and longevity treatments. The methodical plan to test it on others first shows a surprisingly modern understanding of clinical trials and dosage. Yet, in the story's most heartbreaking twist, a serpent steals the plant while Gilgamesh bathes, sloughing off its skin as it departs, a powerful image of renewal that nature claims for itself, denying humanity the prize. This moment is a brilliant observation on the inherent challenges of preserving and applying biological discoveries, and a poignant acknowledgement that nature often holds secrets it is reluctant to yield. Ultimately, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk empty-handed in his quest for physical immortality, but he returns a changed man. He has gained wisdom. He looks upon the massive, enduring walls of his city, which he built, and understands that while his body will die, his legacy, his works, his city, his story will live on. This is the epic's final and most important scientific contribution, a shift in the framework of inquiry. It suggests that the true object of study shouldn't just be the extension of biological life, but the improvement of the human condition within its natural span. By accepting mortality, Gilgamesh doesn't give up on progress, he redefines it. His story, like all great science, begins with a question born of fear and desire, and ends not with a simple answer, but with a deeper, more meaningful understanding of the system in which we exist. The epic posits that our greatest immortality may not be found in a single plant, but in the cumulative, ever-growing garden of human achievement, built stone by stone and story by story across the generations. Plato takes us on another profound journey into the inner workings of the human mind with his allegory of the Chariot, found in the dialogue Phaedrus. Here he presents the soul not as a singular entity, but as a complex system in constant negotiation. Picture a charioteer guiding a pair of powerful, winged horses across the sky. One horse is noble and well-bred, obedient and responsive to the driver's commands. The other is its opposite, wild, unruly, and driven by its basest instincts, constantly trying to bolt toward whatever desire catches its eye. The charioteer himself represents our rational faculty, our logical mind that holds the reins and strives to steer this unstable team toward truth and beauty. This isn't just a poetic image, it's a startlingly sophisticated pre-empirical model of the human psyche, a map of our internal conflicts crafted centuries before the field of psychology even had a name. This ancient allegory resonates so powerfully because it perfectly captures the universal human experience of internal struggle. We've all felt that tension between what we know we should do and what we desperately want to do in the moment. The noble horse aligns with our higher aspirations, our goals, our ethics, our disciplined pursuit of knowledge. The unruly horse embodies our raw, primal urges, our impulses, our distractions, our thirst for immediate gratification. The charioteer's difficult task, straining to control these two opposing forces, is the eternal work of self-mastery. For anyone engaged in scientific or intellectual work, this metaphor is instantly familiar. It's the battle to focus on a complex problem when part of your mind would rather scroll through distractions. It's the discipline required to stick to a rigorous methodology when a more exciting but less proven idea beckons. Plato's Chariot is a timeless illustration of the focus and self-control required for any sustained intellectual endeavor. The brilliance of this model becomes even clearer when we see its echoes in modern psychology. Over 2 millennia later, Sigmund Freud proposed his famous structural model of the psyche, dividing the mind into the id, the ego, and the superego. The parallels are striking. Plato's unruly horse is a near-perfect allegory for the id, the unconscious, pleasure-seeking, instinctual part of our mind that operates on impulse. The noble horse corresponds to the superego, the internalized voice of morality and ideals that strives for perfection. And the charioteer, of course, is the ego, the conscious self that must mediate between the demands of the id, the standards of the superego, and the realities of the external world. It's astonishing that a philosophical allegory could so accurately prefigure a foundational concept of clinical psychology. demonstrating that ancient thinkers were already grappling with the complexities of human motivation and behavior through the tools they had available, metaphor and story. Beyond just describing conflict, the allegory also prescribes a solution, harmony. The goal for the charioteer is not to starve or kill the unruly horse, but to train it. It's about integrating these competing parts of the self into a functional whole, where energy and reason can work in concert. This idea of internal harmony is absolutely critical to the scientific process. A researcher driven solely by cold, sterile logic without any passion or curiosity, the noble horse alone might lack the drive to pursue difficult questions. Conversely, a scientist driven only by a wild desire for discovery without rational discipline, the unruly horse running free, would abandon sound methodology for reckless speculation. True breakthrough happens when passionate curiosity is expertly guided by rigorous reason. The charioteer succeeds not by choosing one horse over the other, but by mastering the art of driving both together, channeling their combined power toward a single, enlightened destination. Plato's allegory, therefore, is more than an ancient curiosity. It is an enduring lesson on the psychological foundation of all disciplined inquiry, reminding us that the first and most important laboratory any scientist must learn to master is the landscape of their own mind. But the story of Daedalus extends far beyond the tragic flight of his son. He stands as perhaps the most complete archetype of the inventor in all of mythology, a figure whose entire life story allegorizes the exhilarating yet perilous journey of creation itself. His most famous commission, the Labyrinth for King Minos of Crete, is a masterpiece of complex design. It wasn't just a maze, it was an inescapable prison built to contain the Minotaur, a creature that was half man, half bull. Think about the intellectual challenge this represents. Daedalus wasn't merely stacking stones, he was engineering a puzzle, a physical algorithm of twisting corridors and dead ends designed to confuse and trap anyone who entered. This structure is a profound metaphor for the kind of problems scientists and mathematicians face: complex systems that seem to have no clear entrance or exit. Navigating such a system requires more than brute force. It demands a deep understanding of patterns, logic, and topology. The labyrinth is the ultimate symbol of a problem that must be understood from the inside out, a reminder that the most brilliant solutions often come from comprehending the underlying architecture of a challenge, not just hacking away at its surface. Yet the genius of Daedalus also contains a critical warning. After constructing the labyrinth, he and his son Icarus were themselves imprisoned within it by a paranoid King Minos. This is the first unintended consequence of his invention. The creator becomes trapped by his own creation. His solution, of course, was to craft wings from feathers and wax, a breathtaking leap of innovative thinking that allowed them to escape their stone prison. But here, the allegory deepens into its most famous cautionary layer. He gave his son explicit, precise instructions on how to use this new technology: fly the middle course. Do not fly too low where the sea's dampness could clog the wings, and do not fly too high where the sun's heat could melt the wax. These weren't just a father's worries, they were the essential operating parameters of a new technology, the user manual for a radical invention. Icarus, intoxicated by the thrill of flight and the feeling of godlike power, ignored the manual. He soared ever higher, the wax melted, and he fell to his death. This moment is one of the most powerful in all of mythology about the nature of innovation. It tells us that a brilliant invention is only half the equation. The other, equally crucial half is understanding its limits and the responsibility that comes with wielding it. Daedalus, the careful engineer, embodied the principle of responsible innovation. Icarus, the exuberant user, embodied the hubris that can lead to disaster. This duality is at the heart of every major scientific advancement today. The scientist who discovers a new energy source must also consider its potential for weaponization. The programmer who codes a powerful algorithm must build in safeguards against its misuse. Daedalus's story teaches us that true ingenuity isn't just about whether we can build something, but whether we should and how we ensure it is used wisely. Ultimately, the myth of Daedalus is a balanced and timeless allegory for the entire scientific and inventive spirit. It celebrates the sheer power of human creativity to solve seemingly impossible problems, to literally engineer a way out of no way. It champions the intersection of art and science, showing that the elegance of a solution is as important as its functionality. Yet, it never lets us forget that every act of creation carries with it a shadow, the potential for unforeseen consequences, for misuse, and for tragedy when ambition outpaces caution. Daedalus is both a hero and a warning, a symbol of our greatest potential and our most profound responsibilities. His story doesn't tell us to stop inventing. It tells us to invent with our eyes wide open, to respect the tools we create, and to always remember that the most dangerous labyrinth isn't always the one we build, but the ethical one we must navigate with every new power we obtain. Now consider the sheer power attributed to Orpheus's music. It wasn't just pleasant, it was physically transformative. He didn't merely entertain wild animals, he charmed them, soothing their savage instincts and bringing natural enemies to lie down together in peace. Even more astonishingly, his music possessed the power to make stones and trees move, to rearrange the very landscape itself to follow the rhythm of his song. On one level, this is a beautiful fantasy, but on another, it's a profound allegory for the physical science of acoustics and vibration, specifically the phenomenon of resonance. Resonance is the tendency of a system to vibrate with greater amplitude at specific frequencies. When a singer hits the exact pitch that matches the natural frequency of a wine glass, the vibrations can transfer enough energy to shatter it. Orpheus's ability to move stones poetically captures this principle, the idea that sound, a vibration traveling through the air, can find a matching frequency within solid matter and set it into motion. The ancient storytellers were observing that sound has a tangible, physical impact on the world, and they encoded that observation into the superhuman abilities of their hero. They were describing, in narrative form, the power of a perfectly tuned vibration to influence its environment, a concept that would take centuries for physicists to formalize with mathematics. This idea extends beyond the physical into the emotional and psychological. Orpheus's music didn't just move rocks, it moved hearts. It could calm rage, soothe grief, and inspire joy. This speaks to another layer of resonance, emotional resonance. We still use that term today to describe an idea or a piece of art that profoundly connects with us, that seems to vibrate at our own internal frequency. The myth suggests an ancient intuition that the same principles governing physical vibration might also govern human feeling and consciousness. The ordered, mathematical ratios that create harmonious music were seen as a reflection of a deeper order in the cosmos itself. This concept famously captivated later scientists like Johannes Kepler, who in the 17th century was obsessed with finding the music of the spheres, the hidden harmonic ratios he believed governed the motions of the planets. Orpheus then becomes more than a musician. He becomes a metaphor for the scientist or philosopher who seeks the fundamental harmonies that underpin all of reality, who believes the universe operates not on chaos, but on a beautiful, intelligible, and perhaps even musical order. The most poignant part of the myth, his descent into the underworld to retrieve his wife Eurydice, deepens this allegory of the seeker after hidden knowledge. The underworld, across countless cultures, represents the ultimate unknown, the realm of death, secrets, and that which is beyond ordinary perception. Orpheus's journey there is the ultimate act of inquiry. He doesn't go with a sword but with his lyre. His tool is not force but art and science combined. His music is so powerful, so resonant, that it temporarily stops the eternal punishments of the damned and moves the cold hearts of Hades and Persephone themselves. This is a stunning narrative about the power of creative intelligence to venture into the darkest, most forbidden places in search of what was lost. It's the quest for knowledge that everyone says is impossible to retrieve. For a moment he succeeds. He is granted his wish on one condition: he must not look back until they reach the upper world. He fails, of course, turning at the last moment to ensure she is following and losing her forever. This tragic ending is often read as a lesson about trust or patience, but in the context of a scientific allegory, it reads differently. It speaks to the fragility of discovery, the idea that some truths, once brought up from the depths, can be incredibly difficult to hold onto. The conditions for maintaining them are strict and often counterintuitive. One moment of doubt, one lapse in methodology, and the discovery can vanish, retreating back into the unknown. Orpheus's story, therefore, is a bittersweet tribute to all those who dare to seek answers in the darkness, using the resonant power of their curiosity to momentarily illuminate truths that are almost, but not quite, within our grasp. Plato's cave takes on a breathtaking new dimension when we turn our gaze upward to the stars. Those flickering shadows on the wall aren't just abstract illusions. They become a powerful metaphor for the celestial dance that ancient astronomers struggled to decipher. For millennia, humanity looked up at the night sky and saw a fixed, revolving dome. The sun rose in the east and set in the west. The planets, whose very name means wanderer, traced complex, looping paths against the backdrop of stars. This was the reality everyone could see, the shared sensory experience that seemed as undeniable as the shadows on the cave wall. To suggest anything else was to challenge the very nature of perceived reality. But the true astronomers, the ones who began to question the show playing out above them, were like the prisoner who turned away from the wall. They started to ask what was casting those shadows, what machinery lay behind the visible performance. This shift in thinking is perfectly captured by the monumental move from the geocentric model of Ptolemy to the heliocentric model of Copernicus. Ptolemy's system was brilliant in its complexity, a masterpiece of mathematical engineering designed to explain the apparent motions of the planets using a series of circles upon circles called epicycles. It worked. It predicted the positions of celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy. But it was a system built to explain the shadows, to make the flickering images on the wall make sense without ever leaving the cave. It treated the Earth as the fixed central point because that's exactly how it felt. Copernicus and later Galileo and Kepler did the unthinkable. They dared to suggest that the senses were lying. They proposed that to understand the true nature of the cosmos, you had to mentally leave the cave of Earth itself and imagine a viewpoint from the sun. This was the ultimate act of intellectual liberation, a direct echo of the prisoner's painful journey into the sunlight. The heliocentric model was initially less accurate than Ptolemy's, and it defied both common sense and religious doctrine. It was a blinding, uncomfortable truth that, once seen, could not be unseen, and it forever changed our place in the universe. The cave itself can be seen as one of humanity's first conceptual planetariums, a controlled model of the heavens. The fire represents the sun, the puppeteers represent the unseen forces and laws of physics, and the carved figures they carry could be the planets and stars themselves. The prisoners watching the play of light are like ancient stargazers mapping the constellations and tracking the seasons without understanding the mechanics behind the display. This allegory champions the use of models and thought experiments to understand systems too vast or too complex to perceive directly. Just as the cave is a simplified simulation of reality, so too are the mathematical models scientists use today to understand black holes, the birth of galaxies, or the expansion of the universe. We cannot travel to a black hole, but we can create sophisticated simulations that reveal their properties. We are, in a sense, still in the cave, but we have learned to build better and better projectors, to craft more accurate puppets, in our relentless effort to deduce the true nature of the light source outside. Ultimately, Plato's ancient story provides the philosophical bedrock for all of astronomy. It is a narrative about the courage to distrust appearances and to seek a reality beyond our immediate perception. Every time an astronomer points a telescope at a faint nebula or a physicist runs a simulation of the early universe, they are enacting the prisoner's journey. They are turning away from the easy, apparent truth and straining to see the outlines of the puppets, the nature of the fire, and the brilliance of the sun. The allegory doesn't provide the answers, but it gives us the reason to ask the questions. It is a permanent invitation to escape the cave of our assumptions and bask in the illuminating and often startling light of objective cosmic truth. Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold the entire weight of the heavens upon his shoulders, is one of the most enduring images from Greek mythology. We often see him as the ultimate symbol of endurance and punishment, a figure straining under an eternal, impossible burden. But if we look past this surface reading, his myth reveals itself to be a sophisticated cosmological model, a story that encodes humanity's earliest attempts to understand the architecture of the cosmos itself. In many ancient traditions, Atlas isn't just holding up a random weight. He is quite literally the pillar of the universe. He represents the axis mundi, the world axis, a central pole around which the entire celestial sphere was believed to rotate. This concept is found in countless cultures, from the Norse Yggdrasil to the Hindu Mount Meru, reflecting a universal human need to visualize a stable center in a seemingly chaotic sky. Atlas's posture, forever holding up the dome of the heavens, is a direct allegory for the geocentric model of the universe, where a stationary Earth sits at the center and all the stars and planets revolve around it. His immense effort is the mythological answer to a profound scientific question that plagued early astronomers: what keeps the sky from falling down? This leads us directly into the realm of celestial mechanics, the study of how celestial bodies move and interact. Atlas's burden is a poetic personification of the forces that govern the cosmos, long before gravity was mathematically defined by Newton. In the ancient worldview, the planets and stars weren't simply drifting through empty space. They were embedded in a series of solid, crystalline spheres that rotated around the Earth at different speeds and angles. This model, perfected by astronomers like Ptolemy, was designed to explain the complex, looping motions of the planets that observers saw from Earth. The tremendous weight Atlas bears is the combined mass and momentum of all these spheres grinding against each other. His struggle is the universe's struggle to maintain its order and prevent cosmic chaos. It's a narrative explanation for the stability and regularity of the heavens, a stability that later scientists would attribute to the invisible force of gravity. In this way, Atlas's myth isn't just a story. It's a precursor to the equations that would one day describe orbital mechanics, representing the immense, constant tension that keeps planets in their tracks and stars in their courses. Beyond the physics, Atlas's story carries a powerful allegorical weight for the scientific endeavor itself. To bear the weight of the heavens is to bear the weight of astronomical knowledge, a responsibility that is both awe-inspiring and crushing. Early astronomers who sought to map the stars and predict celestial events were undertaking a monumental task. They were attempting to hold up an entire system of understanding, to create order from a dizzying array of data points visible only as pinpricks of light in the night sky. This intellectual burden is the same one shouldered by every great cosmologist, from Copernicus to Hubble. It is the weight of knowing how vast and complex the universe truly is, and the simultaneous responsibility to translate that complexity into something comprehensible for humanity. Atlas, therefore, becomes a symbol for every scientist who has ever dedicated their life to supporting our cosmic worldview, ensuring that our understanding of the heavens doesn't come crashing down under the weight of its own contradictions or complexities. His eternal task reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is not a sprint but a marathon of endurance, requiring immense strength and unwavering commitment to uphold the ever-expanding dome of human discovery. Prometheus's act of defiance echoes through the ages not just as a story of theft, but as the ultimate allegory for the moral weight of discovery itself. Imagine his journey to Mount Olympus, not to plunder a simple flame, but to seize the very spark of enlightenment, the power to cook food, forge metal, illuminate the darkness, and ultimately to think and create. This was more than fire. It was the foundational tool of technology, the catalyst for civilization, and a perfect metaphor for all scientific knowledge that grants humanity power over its environment. His theft is the original act of disruptive innovation, a deliberate challenge to a divine order that sought to keep humanity in a state of ignorant subservience. He saw potential in us that the gods themselves feared, and he made the conscious choice to unleash it, knowing full well the wrath it would invite. This moment captures the essence of the scientific impulse, the relentless drive to know, to improve, to push boundaries, even when those boundaries are guarded by formidable authority. Yet, the myth immediately forces us to confront the profound ethical dilemma that comes with this gift. Who truly owns knowledge once it is discovered? Prometheus made the radical decision that such a powerful tool belonged not to an elite few on a mountaintop, but to all of humanity. He represents the principle of open science, the belief that knowledge should be disseminated for the collective good rather than hoarded for power or profit. This ancient debate is startlingly modern. Today, we see it play out in conflicts over patenting life-saving drugs, where corporate profit motives can clash with global public health needs. We see it in the tension between academic publishers who lock research behind paywalls and the open access movement that fights to make knowledge free for all. Prometheus's choice asks us a critical question. Is knowledge a commodity to be controlled or a fundamental human right to be shared? His actions suggest that the true purpose of innovation is not to concentrate power, but to empower, a lesson that continues to challenge our economic and scientific institutions. The consequences of his actions, however, are terrifying and severe. The gods do not simply scold him, they chain him to a rock where an eagle eternally devours his regenerating liver. This is not just a punishment, it is a gruesome allegory for the personal cost often borne by those who challenge the status quo with new ideas. Prometheus's torment is the suffering of the visionary who is persecuted for their vision. He is Galileo, forced to recant his heliocentric model under threat of torture from the Inquisition. He is countless researchers whose controversial findings have drawn attacks from entrenched interests, from governments, or from a public unwilling to accept uncomfortable truths. The regenerating liver is a particularly powerful detail. It signifies that the struggle is never truly over. The backlash against innovation is perpetual. For every truth revealed, a new wave of resistance and misunderstanding will rise to meet it. The myth acknowledges that advancing human knowledge is often a lonely and painful vocation, requiring a resilience that borders on the superhuman. Ultimately, the story of Prometheus is a balanced and cautionary tale. It celebrates the rebel, the benefactor, the genius who dares to think differently and gifts that thinking to the world. It is a tribute to every scientist, inventor, and thinker who has ever pushed humanity forward. But it also serves as a permanent warning about the dual-use nature of knowledge. The same fire that cooks food can forge weapons. The same nuclear physics that gives us clean energy can give us apocalyptic bombs. The same genetic engineering that can eliminate diseases could, in theory, be used to create them. Prometheus's gift was undeniably good, but it was also undeniably dangerous. The myth doesn't provide easy answers, but it establishes the essential framework for all scientific ethics, that the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the responsibility for its consequences. It teaches us that innovation without foresight is recklessness, and that the true measure of progress is not just what we can do, but what we choose to do with the power we've stolen from the heavens. Plato's journey through the nature of reality doesn't end at the mouth of the cave. In his monumental work, The Republic, he presents another allegory, one that shifts our gaze from shadowy illusions to the most brilliant and life-giving object in our sky, the sun. This isn't just a poetic comparison. It's a sophisticated philosophical framework that, perhaps unintentionally, provides a perfect metaphor for the entire scientific endeavor. Plato asks us to consider the sun as an analogy for what he calls the form of the good, the ultimate, abstract source of all truth, beauty, and intelligibility in the universe. Just as our physical sun is the source of light that makes vision possible, this form of the good is the source of intellectual light that makes knowledge and understanding possible. In the stark simplicity of this comparison, we find a powerful allegory for the role of reason and evidence in science. The scientific method itself is this illuminating force. It is the tool that allows us to see the world clearly, to move from vague suspicion to confirmed fact, from superstition to natural law. Without it, we are like eyes trying to see in total darkness, stumbling over objects we cannot comprehend. With it, the entire natural world comes into sharp, brilliant focus, revealing patterns, causes, and connections that were once utterly invisible. This analogy pushes even further, encouraging a specific kind of intellectual pursuit. Plato suggests that just as we see objects not by looking directly at the sun, but by the light it casts upon them, we come to understand truth not by staring directly at some abstract concept, but by observing how reason and evidence illuminate the subjects of our study. A biologist doesn't see life itself directly. They see how DNA replicates, how cells divide, how ecosystems interact, all phenomena made intelligible by the light of scientific inquiry. A physicist doesn't see gravity. They see its effects on planets and particles, its patterns revealed through mathematics and observation. The sun allegory champions the search for these foundational, unifying principles, the grand underlying theories that explain a dazzling array of seemingly disconnected facts. This is the drive behind Einstein's quest for a unified field theory, or the ongoing search for a theory of everything in modern physics. It's the belief that the universe is ultimately orderly and intelligible, that there is a central, sun-like source of coherence behind the incredible diversity of natural phenomena we observe. There is also a profound and often overlooked layer to this allegory, the idea of gradual acclimation. Plato understood that you cannot drag a man from a dark cave and force him to look directly into the noon sun. The experience would be blinding and painful, and he would recoil. The eyes must first adjust to the dim light of the cave entrance, then to the reflected light of the moon and stars, and finally, after a long and careful process, they can bear the glorious radiance of the sun itself. This is a stunningly accurate description of scientific training and the acceptance of new, revolutionary ideas. A student doesn't start with quantum mechanics or general relativity. They start with the basic principles of mathematics and classical physics. Their mind is gradually acclimated to increasingly complex and counterintuitive concepts. Similarly, when a radical new theory like evolution or plate tectonics is first introduced, it is often mentally blinding to the scientific establishment. It takes time for the community to adjust, to run experiments, to interpret data through this new lens. The theory isn't rejected because it is false, but because its light is initially too brilliant and too disruptive to the established way of seeing. The allegory of the sun, therefore, is a plea for intellectual patience and discipline. It recognizes that the most significant truths are not always immediately comfortable or easy to accept, and that understanding them requires a long, disciplined journey of mental adjustment, building from simple observations to grand, illuminating principles. We often think of scientific breakthroughs as dramatic eureka moments, a single brilliant flash of insight that changes everything in an instant. But the reality of discovery is far more often a grueling, repetitive, and seemingly thankless grind. It's a process that finds its perfect mythological counterpart not in a triumphant hero, but in a tormented king eternally pushing a boulder up a mountain. The myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to repeat the same futile task forever, appears on its surface to be the ultimate story of meaningless labor. Yet, when viewed through the lens of scientific progress, his endless struggle transforms into one of the most powerful and honest allegories for how knowledge is actually built. This isn't a tale of failure, it's a testament to the indispensable value of iteration. Consider the core of his punishment. Sisyphus isn't just pushing a rock, he is engaging in a cycle. He positions his shoulders against the immense weight. He strains every muscle to make it move. He navigates the incline. He gets it to the summit, and then he watches it roll back down. And then he walks back down the hill to begin again. This is the essential, unglamorous heartbeat of the scientific method. Hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, and then back to a new, refined hypothesis. A researcher doesn't run one experiment and have all the answers. They run it, analyze the data, see where it fell short, adjust their parameters, and run it again. Each cycle, each trip up the mountain is not a carbon copy of the last. With every repetition, the scientist, like Sisyphus, learns something new. They learn a more efficient way to push. They identify a slightly smoother path up the slope. They understand the precise point of balance for the boulder. The action looks the same to an outside observer, but the practitioner is accumulating a deep, tacit knowledge that simply cannot be gained any other way. The rock rolls back, but the scientist does not return to the same starting point. They return wiser. This process is built on a foundation of perseverance that borders on the obsessive. The myth captures the emotional reality of research, where progress is measured in millimeters and setbacks are a constant companion. Think of the teams working for decades to detect a gravitational wave, or to develop a mRNA vaccine platform, or to find a material that exhibits superconductivity at room temperature. For years, even generations, the boulder kept rolling back down. Failed grant applications, negative results, broken equipment, and skeptical peers are all part of the rock's relentless backward tumble. What separates a Sisyphean fate from a futile one is the human capacity to find meaning in the struggle itself. The scientist must believe that the act of pushing itself has value, that each attempt narrows the possibilities and hones the question. They must embrace the struggle not as a punishment, but as the very substance of their work. The meaning isn't found only at the summit. It's found in the muscle built during the climb, the patience learned during the descent, and the stubborn refusal to abandon the task. And within that refusal lies the spark of innovation. Sisyphus's curse was to push the boulder, but the myth doesn't say he had to push it the same way every single time. Imagine him after 1,000 trips realizing that if he shifts his grip slightly, he can conserve energy, or that if he starts his push from a different angle, he can gain more momentum. This is where the allegory becomes truly brilliant. The iterative process isn't just about repetition, it's the necessary precondition for creativity. It is the sheer familiarity with failure that breeds ingenious workarounds. Scientific history is filled with stories of happy accidents that weren't accidents at all. They were the result of a prepared mind that had pushed the rock so many times it immediately recognized the significance of a new, unexpected result. The polymerase chain reaction, penicillin, the cosmic microwave background radiation, all were discovered because a researcher, deeply immersed in their own Sisyphean task, knew exactly what they were looking at when the rock briefly veered off its familiar path. The struggle isn't opposed to innovation. It is its crucible, forcing a deeper engagement with the problem that ultimately makes the breakthrough possible. From the solitary, grinding toil of Sisyphus, we now turn to a story about the immense power and profound pitfalls of working together. The Tower of Babel is typically remembered as a simple tale of divine punishment for human pride, but at its core, it is one of history's most enduring allegories for the collapse of a grand collaborative project. Picture the scene: a united humanity, all speaking a single language, decides to build a city with a tower so high its top will reach the heavens. This isn't just an architectural marvel, it's the ultimate moonshot, a massive, coordinated endeavor that leverages the collective intelligence and labor of an entire civilization. Their goal is to make a name for themselves, to achieve something immortal through shared effort. In this initial vision, we see the brilliant promise of big science, the kind of ambitious, world-changing collaboration that would one day give us the Human Genome Project, the Large Hadron Collider, or the International Space Station. It represents the incredible potential that is unlocked when we pool our knowledge and work toward a common, awe-inspiring objective. Yet, the project fails catastrophically, not because the foundations crack or the materials fail, but because the communication system breaks down. The myth says that God, seeing their ambition, confounds their language so that no one can understand each other. The once unified workforce suddenly fractures into babbling, frustrated groups, unable to coordinate or collaborate. The construction grinds to a halt, and the people scatter across the earth, their great dream abandoned. This is not a story about a vengeful god. It's a powerful narrative about the single greatest threat to any complex collaborative effort: the failure of communication. The confounding of language is a perfect metaphor for the specialized jargons, technical dialects, and cultural divides that naturally emerge between different scientific disciplines. A molecular biologist, a data scientist, and a clinical researcher might all be working on the same medical breakthrough, but they often speak such different technical languages that conveying a complex idea becomes like translating between ancient Babylonian and Sumerian. This isn't a divine curse. It's a natural consequence of deep specialization. The myth accurately predicts that without a conscious, dedicated effort to create a shared vernacular, even the most well-funded and well-intentioned project can collapse under the weight of its own miscommunications. This ancient story also serves as a stark warning against the perils of overambition divorced from a concrete understanding. The goal of the tower was to reach heaven, an objective that was metaphorically lofty but practically undefined. What did reaching heaven actually mean? What specific knowledge would it yield? The builders were so focused on the grandeur of the achievement itself that they may have neglected the foundational science and step-by-step innovation required to get there. They aimed for the stars without first understanding the principles of orbital mechanics or materials science. This resonates deeply with modern critiques of techno-solutionism, where grand technological promises are made without a clear path for realistic execution or a thorough consideration of unintended consequences. The Tower of Babel cautions that ambition must be tempered with humility and a rigorous foundational understanding of the problem at hand. It's a call for building a strong base of knowledge before attempting to construct a spire that touches the clouds. Ultimately, the abandoned tower stands not as a monument to failure, but as a permanent lesson in the prerequisites for successful innovation. It teaches that the most advanced technology in the world is useless if the people using it cannot understand each other. It argues for the critical importance of translators and bridge builders within scientific teams, those rare individuals who can fluently speak the languages of multiple disciplines and mediate between them. The myth also champions humility, not as a rejection of ambition, but as its necessary partner. True progress requires the humility to listen, to learn the language of another field, to admit what we do not yet know, and to build a shared understanding from the ground up. The story of Babel doesn't tell us to stop building towers. It tells us that if we want to build them together, we must first learn how to truly talk to one another. Plato offers us a more structured map of the mind's journey out of the cave with his allegory of the divided line, a conceptual tool that feels almost like a precursor to a modern scientific flowchart. He invites us to imagine a single line divided into two unequal sections. The lower, larger section represents the visible world, everything we can perceive with our senses. The upper, smaller section represents the intelligible world, the realm of true knowledge and abstract forms. But then, he divides each of these sections in half again, creating a four-tiered hierarchy of understanding that perfectly charts the ascent from mere opinion to genuine knowledge. This isn't just philosophical musing. It's a stunningly accurate allegory for the rigorous, step-by-step methodology that defines the scientific process. The lowest segment of the line is the world of imagination and illusion. This is where we find shadows, reflections, and copies of copies, the realm of conjecture. In a modern context, this is the world of snap judgments, superstition, and misinformation that floods our senses before we even begin to think critically. It's the equivalent of seeing a headline and accepting it as fact without reading the article, or believing a viral myth because it feels true. The next stage up is belief, where we engage with the actual physical objects themselves that cast those shadows. This is a step closer to reality, but it's still unstable. Our beliefs are based on our immediate, often flawed, sensory experience. We see the sun move across the sky, and we believe it orbits the earth. We feel the ground as solid and stationary, and believe it is the unmoving center of the universe. This stage represents pre-scientific observation, relying on appearances without questioning the deeper mechanisms at work. It's the starting point for all inquiry, but a point we must consciously choose to move beyond. The crucial turn happens when we cross into the upper half of the line, the intelligible world. The first stage here is the realm of thought, where the mind uses the objects from the lower world as images to reason toward higher principles. This is the domain of the hypothesis and the model. A scientist in this stage looks at the physical world, a falling apple, the orbit of Mars, the symptoms of a disease, and doesn't just see the thing itself. They see a puzzle to be solved, a pattern to be decoded. They create abstract models, mathematical equations, and thought experiments to explain what they observe. They might use Ptolemy's complex system of epicycles to model planetary motion, or a physical replica of DNA to understand its structure. These models are not reality itself. They are tools for reasoning, stepping stones that use the visible to access the invisible. Plato brilliantly validates this entire process, showing that these abstractions are not a distraction from truth but an essential pathway toward it. At the very top of the line resides intelligence, the stage of pure understanding where the mind operates directly with the forms and principles themselves, without the need for any physical crutches or models. This is the ultimate goal of the scientific endeavor, the formulation of a fundamental theory. It's the moment when a Newton discerns the universal law of gravitation from the motion of planets and falling objects, or when an Einstein perceives that energy and mass are two expressions of the same underlying reality. This isn't a rejection of the physical world, but its complete and total comprehension through abstract, immutable laws. The scientist at this stage no longer needs to look at every single apple that falls. They understand the principle that governs all falling objects everywhere in the universe. The divided line, therefore, provides a timeless philosophical blueprint for the scientific mindset. It argues that true knowledge is not a sudden revelation but a structured cognitive ascent, a disciplined climb from the shifting shadows of opinion through the reliable scaffolding of models and hypotheses to the brilliant, unchanging light of first principles. Now let's navigate from the grand, collaborative failure of Babel to a much more intimate and personal puzzle, one that has fascinated philosophers and scientists for millennia, all stemming from the story of a single ship. The myth of Theseus, the great hero of Athens, doesn't end with his slaying of the Minotaur. It continues with his trusty ship, the vessel that carried him to and from Crete, which the grateful Athenians preserved in their harbor as a memorial. As the years turned into decades and then centuries, the wooden planks of the ship began to rot. To maintain this precious relic, the caretakers would carefully replace each decaying plank with a new, identical piece of timber. Over time, every single part of the ship, every board, every nail, every rope was eventually swapped out. This simple act of preservation gives rise to one of the most enduring thought experiments in history. If every original component has been replaced, is it still the Ship of Theseus? And if not, at what precise point did it stop being the same ship? This ancient conundrum is far more than a clever brain teaser. It is a profound allegory that cuts to the very heart of how science understands identity, continuity, and the nature of reality itself. This paradox finds a stunning parallel in the living world within our very own bodies. The human body is in a constant, silent state of flux, a biological ship of Theseus sailing through time. The cells that make up your skin are completely replaced every 2 to 3 weeks. Your stomach lining regenerates every few days. Even your skeleton is entirely remodeled over a decade. The red blood cells coursing through your veins today are not the same ones that were there 6 months ago. At a microscopic level, you are quite literally not the same physical person you were a year ago. And yet, you undoubtedly feel a continuous sense of self. Your memories, your personality, your consciousness, they persist seamlessly through this total material turnover. This is the biological expression of the paradox. It forces us to ask what exactly constitutes the you that remains constant. Is it the specific arrangement of atoms which are perpetually being swapped out from the food you eat and the air you breathe? Or is it the dynamic, self-sustaining pattern that those atoms temporarily form, the intricate information and energy flow that defines a living organism? The myth pushes biology beyond mere cataloging of parts and into the deeper philosophical waters of what it means to be a coherent, continuous entity in a universe of constant change. The puzzle doesn't stop at the boundary of our skin. It extends into the fundamental laws of physics, particularly the principle of the conservation of matter. This law states that matter cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed and rearranged. Every atom in that replaced plank from the Ship of Theseus still exists somewhere in the universe. Perhaps it became soil, was absorbed by a tree, and was later harvested to become part of a new ship for someone else. The atoms that currently make up your body were once part of stars, dinosaurs, and countless other people and things. The physical stuff of the universe is endlessly recycled. So, if the atoms are eternal and merely changing their configuration, does the concept of a distinct object even hold water? Or are we merely labeling temporary patterns in an eternal flow of matter? This shifts the question from one of material to one of information and relationship. Perhaps the identity of the ship isn't in its wooden parts, but in its history, its design, its place in the cultural narrative of Athens. Similarly, your identity isn't in your carbon atoms, but in the unique, organized neural network and genetic code that patterns those atoms into the person known as you. The myth, therefore, prepares the ground for a modern scientific view where processes and patterns are more fundamental than the particles that momentarily constitute them. This ancient thought experiment finds startling new life in the bizarre world of quantum mechanics. where particles lack definite states and exist in probabilities until observed. At this subatomic level, the very idea of a distinct, persistent object becomes blurry. The paradox challenges our classical intuition and aligns with a more quantum view, where identity might be better understood as a set of relationships and probabilities rather than a collection of definite parts. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Ship of Theseus allegory is that it provides a narrative framework for grappling with one of the most profound aspects of scientific inquiry: the relationship between structure and function, between matter and form. It teaches us that to understand the world, we must look beyond the superficial appearance of solid, permanent objects and learn to see the dynamic, flowing processes that those objects represent. The ship is not a thing, but a happening. A human is not a static collection of cells, but a whirlpool of energy and information, constantly renewing itself while maintaining a stable shape. By wrestling with this paradox, we aren't just solving a logic puzzle. We are training our minds to see the universe as it truly is, not a gallery of frozen statues, but a ceaseless, flowing dance of transformation. Odysseus's epic 10-year voyage home from the Trojan War is far more than a thrilling adventure story. It is a masterful allegory for the perilous and winding journey of scientific discovery itself. Each leg of his journey, each monstrous encounter and seemingly insurmountable obstacle, mirrors the challenges a researcher faces when venturing into the unknown in pursuit of truth. His ultimate goal, to return to his kingdom of Ithaca and his wife Penelope, is the scientist's quest for a unifying theory, a foundational understanding that makes sense of a chaotic world. The path is never straight, filled with setbacks, wrong turns, and temptations that threaten to derail the entire mission, requiring not just brute strength but a profound combination of intelligence, patience, and resilience. Consider the tools Odysseus relies upon most. He is a master of celestial navigation, using the stars to guide his ship across the trackless sea. This is a powerful metaphor for the fundamental principles and established laws that scientists use to orient themselves in their investigations. Just as the stars provide a fixed reference point in a shifting seascape, the scientific method offers a reliable framework for testing hypotheses and interpreting data amidst uncertainty. But Odysseus also possesses metis, a cunning intelligence that allows him to adapt to unpredictable situations. When trapped in the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus, he doesn't attempt to fight the giant directly, an effort that would be futile. Instead, he devises a clever plan, intoxicating the creature, blinding him, and escaping by hiding under the bellies of sheep. This episode allegorizes the critical scientific skill of creative problem solving. A researcher often cannot attack a problem head-on. They must outthink it, finding an ingenious angle or developing a novel methodology to circumvent a seemingly impossible roadblock. The Cyclops, a creature of brute force and simplistic thinking who declares, "Nobody is hurting me," represents the kind of stubborn, unexamined obstacle that can only be overcome with wit and strategic innovation. Perhaps the most famous episode, the encounter with the sirens, serves as a timeless warning about the seductive dangers that can lure a seeker of knowledge off course. The sirens sing a song of irresistible allure, promising to reveal all the secrets of the world to anyone who draws near. But their gift is a trap. Those who succumb are led to their doom on the rocky shore. This is a perfect allegory for the captivating but unverified theories or elegant but unproven models that can mesmerize a field of study. They promise ultimate answers with beautiful simplicity, but they lack empirical foundation and can destroy a career or lead an entire discipline down a fruitless path for years. Odysseus's solution is brilliantly methodological. He orders his crew to plug their ears with wax, insulating themselves from the dangerous distraction entirely. He, however, wanting to hear the song but not succumb to it, has himself tied firmly to the mast of the ship with strict orders not to be released no matter how much he begs. This is a profound image of scientific rigor and self-imposed constraint. It represents the importance of pre-committing to a rigorous methodology, of building safeguards against one's own biases and desires into an experiment. The researcher, like Odysseus, may be tempted by a beautiful idea, but they must be bound by the ropes of peer review, falsifiability, and evidential standards to ensure they are not shipwrecked by wishful thinking. His long captivity on the island of the nymph Calypso offers another layer of meaning. She offers him immortality and eternal youth if he will only abandon his quest to return home. For 7 years, he is tempted by this offer of a painless, perfect existence, a kind of intellectual stasis where the hard work of the journey is over. This represents the comfort of settling into a dominant paradigm, of enjoying the accolades of a settled career and resisting the discomfort of new challenges that could overturn one's life's work. To leave Calypso is to choose the difficult path of continued inquiry over the ease of accepted dogma. Ultimately, Odysseus's perseverance, his unwavering focus on reaching his true home despite all distractions and sufferings, mirrors the tenacity required for genuine discovery. The scientific journey is rarely a swift victory. It is a long odyssey of failed experiments, rejected papers, and moments of despair. But through cunning navigation, resilience against temptation, and an unshakable commitment to the goal, the researcher, like the hero, can finally arrive home, not to a journey's end, but to a deeper understanding that was worth every trial endured. Plato's cave, conceived over 2 millennia ago, might seem like a relic of ancient philosophy, but its shadows stretch long into our modern digital age, casting a startling light on the very fabric of our contemporary reality. Those flickering images on the wall, which the prisoners mistook for the whole of existence, find their perfect parallel in the curated feeds of our social media platforms, the algorithmically generated news cycles, and the immersive, persuasive illusions of virtual reality. We are, in a very real sense, the new prisoners, chained not by physical bonds but by the addictive glow of our screens, accepting a stream of digital shadows as an accurate representation of the world. These shadows are no longer cast by puppeteers holding carved figures behind a fire. They are crafted by complex code, corporate interests, and sometimes malicious actors, all designed to capture our attention and shape our perception. The cave is no longer a physical space. It is a personalized informational ecosystem, an echo chamber that constantly reinforces our existing biases and shields us from anything that might challenge our comfortable illusions. This modern cave creates a pervasive and dangerous form of misinformation, where false narratives can spread with the speed and intensity of a wildfire, often outpacing and overwhelming slower, evidence-based truths. A conspiracy theory becomes a shadow play viewed by millions, while a peer-reviewed scientific study remains a faint whisper in the corner of the cave. The journey out of this digital cavern is more arduous than ever because the puppeteers have become incredibly sophisticated. They don't just show us shadows, they show us shadows we want to see, creating an addictive loop where our own preferences and fears are used to keep us engaged and docile. Escaping requires a conscious and often uncomfortable act of will, the decision to seek out primary sources, to engage with perspectives that feel alien or threatening, and to subject every appealing image on our wall to the rigorous test of verification. This is the modern equivalent of turning away from the wall and facing the fire. It is the practice of radical media literacy and critical thinking, the essential tools for breaking our digital chains. In this updated struggle, the role of the guide, the person who has seen the outside world and returns to help others, becomes more vital than ever. These are the educators, the science communicators, the investigative journalists, and the fact-checkers who dedicate themselves to helping others navigate the confusing landscape of modern information. They are the ones patiently explaining how to identify reliable sources, how to understand statistical data, how to recognize logical fallacies, and how the very algorithms that enslave us actually function. Their task is as difficult as that of Plato's freed prisoner. They are often met with hostility and disbelief from those who are comfortable in their digital captivity, who interpret any challenge to their reality as an attack on their identity. Guiding someone out of a comfortable falsehood is a delicate act of empathy and patience, requiring not just facts, but a compassionate understanding of why the illusion felt so real and so necessary in the first place. The allegory also offers a profound warning about emerging technologies like virtual and augmented reality. These technologies promise incredible new experiences, but they also have the potential to become the ultimate cave, a perfectly constructed illusion so convincing that the outside world might seem dull and undesirable by comparison. If we are not careful, we could willingly chain ourselves to a new wall, accepting a manufactured reality that is controlled not by our own senses and reason, but by the corporations and engineers who design the simulation. The philosophical questions Plato raised become urgently practical. How do we maintain a connection to objective truth when our senses can be so completely and convincingly hijacked? The answer, as it was in the ancient allegory, lies in the relentless pursuit of education and scientific literacy. These are not just academic subjects, they are the mental muscles required to distinguish the real from the virtual, the evidence-based from the emotionally manipulative, no matter how compelling the shadow play on the wall may be. The Story of Phaethon presents us with a scenario that feels unnervingly modern, a novice being handed the controls to a system of unimaginable power with disastrous results. Eager to prove his divine lineage, the young Phaethon asks his father, the sun god Helios, for permission to drive the chariot of the sun across the sky for a single day. Helios, bound by a sacred oath, reluctantly agrees but pleads with his son to reconsider, warning him of the immense difficulty and danger. He describes the terrifyingly steep ascent, the dizzying height, and the furious, untamed horses of fire that pull the chariot. This isn't a simple joyride. It's the most critical piece of celestial infrastructure, and its stable operation is essential for all life on Earth. Helios's desperate warnings are the allegorical equivalent of a rigorous safety briefing and a master's lifetime of hard-earned expertise, all compressed into a final, futile attempt to prevent catastrophe. He is the voice of experience, trying to impart the profound responsibility that comes with wielding such awesome power, a responsibility that his son, in his youthful arrogance and ignorance, is completely unequipped to understand. Ignoring every warning, Phaethon seizes the reins. The moment he does, he is instantly overwhelmed. The fiery horses sense his weakness and incompetence immediately, bolting from their well-worn path and plunging wildly through the heavens. The chariot veers too close to the earth, scorching the continents, boiling the rivers, and creating the great deserts of Africa. Then it swings too high, freezing entire regions and threatening to snuff out the stars. The world teeters on the brink of total annihilation, saved only when Zeus is forced to strike the boy down with a thunderbolt to stop the chaos. This isn't just a myth about a bad driver. It's a perfect allegory for the perils of engaging with profoundly complex systems without the requisite knowledge, skill, and respect. Phaethon's fatal flaw wasn't a lack of ambition, but a catastrophic lack of preparation. He believed that his desire to drive the chariot was qualification enough, a dangerous confusion of entitlement with expertise. This ancient narrative finds its chilling echo in the most pressing scientific dilemmas of our time. The development of nuclear fission in the 20th century was our collective Phaethon moment. Humanity, in the form of the Manhattan Project scientists, had harnessed the fundamental power of the atom itself, the very energy that fuels the stars. Unlike Helios, many of those who understood the technology most deeply were immediately filled with dread. They knew they were handing the reins of a sun-like force to a world still mired in geopolitical conflict and immaturity. The subsequent decades of nuclear proliferation, near misses like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the ongoing challenges of nuclear waste disposal are all part of the Chariot's wild, scorching path across our modern sky. The myth asks us if we, as a species, have truly developed the wisdom to match our power, or if we are still like the boy, holding reins we barely comprehend. The allegory extends with terrifying precision to the emerging field of climate engineering. Concepts like solar radiation management, which propose injecting reflective particles into the upper atmosphere to bounce sunlight back into space and cool the planet, represent a direct attempt to take the reins of the sun chariot. The intention might be noble to mitigate the devastating effects of global warming, but the potential for unintended consequences is Phaethonian in scale. Tinkering with the planet's thermostat is not like adjusting a dial in a lab. It is intervening in a deeply interconnected, non-linear system that we are still striving to fully understand. A misstep could alter global rainfall patterns, creating droughts that starve millions, or trigger a catastrophic chain reaction we cannot reverse. The myth screams a warning against the hubris of a technological quick fix without first mastering the underlying principles and acknowledging the limits of our predictive models. Ultimately, Phaethon's story is a permanent moral lesson etched into our cultural memory. It champions the virtue of humility before complexity. It argues that before we intervene in any powerful system, be it ecological, genetic, or energetic, we must first possess a deep, systemic understanding of how it functions. We must listen to the Helios figures, the experts who dedicate their lives to studying these forces, and we must respect that some thresholds of power should not be crossed without near-perfect certainty. The myth doesn't tell us to abandon innovation or to live in fear of progress. Instead, it demands that we grow into our power, that we earn the right to hold the reins through decades of cautious study, incremental testing, and ethical foresight. The sun chariot is not a toy, it is a sacred trust, and Phaethon's fate reminds us that the price of failure is not just personal, but cosmic. Deep within the heart of an impossibly complex maze, a monstrous half-man, half-bull awaits, a creature born of unnatural forces and trapped by its own savage nature. The Minotaur is more than a monster. It is the perfect embodiment of a problem so vast, so intricate, and so terrifying that it seems utterly insurmountable. It represents the kind of challenge that can paralyze us with fear, a devastating pandemic, the puzzle of climate change, or the enigmatic nature of consciousness itself. These are the monsters of complexity that lurk in the uncharted territories of knowledge, and the labyrinth built to contain this beast is one of our most powerful ancient allegories for the tangled, interconnected systems we must learn to navigate. This isn't just a prison of stone, it's a metaphor for the very structure of complex problems, where every corridor represents a variable, every turn a potential cause or effect, and the entire structure is designed to confuse and disorient anyone brave or foolish enough to enter. The myth tells us that the world's greatest challenges are not simple beasts to be slain with a sword, but intricate puzzles that must be understood from the inside out. Confronting such a maze requires a new way of thinking, a shift from brute force to strategic insight. This is where the myth aligns perfectly with the principles of systems theory, a modern scientific approach that studies how components of a system interrelate and how systems work over time within the context of larger systems. The labyrinth is that system. You cannot understand it by studying a single stone in its wall or by standing at its entrance and shouting. To defeat the Minotaur, to solve the complex problem, you must commit to walking its pathways, to mapping its relationships, and to understanding how every part influences the whole. A doctor fighting a disease must do more than treat a symptom. They must understand the patient's entire history, environment, and genetics, the biological labyrinth in which the illness resides. An ecologist cannot save a single species without considering the entire food web, the climate patterns, and human activity that form the ecosystem's maze. The genius of the allegory is its recognition that the problem and its container are one and the same. The Minotaur is a product of the labyrinth's confusing design, just as our most daunting problems are often emergent properties of complex, interconnected systems. This is where Theseus, the hero of our story, provides the master key. His most crucial tool was not his strength or his sword, but a simple ball of thread given to him by Ariadne. Before he ever stepped into the maze, he tied one end to the entrance. As he ventured deeper into the darkness, he carefully unspooled the thread behind him, creating a physical record of his path. This thread is nothing less than the scientific method itself. It represents the creation of a model, the tracing of causality, and the rigorous documentation of one's journey through a problem space. Each step into the labyrinth is a hypothesis. Each fork in the path is an experiment. The thread is the data he collects, allowing him to avoid infinite loops of dead ends and to retrace his steps when a path proves fruitless. It is the ultimate symbol of rational navigation, a way to impose linear logic on non-linear chaos. In a modern lab, this thread is the researcher's detailed lab notebook, the control group in a clinical trial, or the line of code that allows a scientist to model a protein folding over time. It is the tangible evidence of exploration that allows for verification, replication, and ultimately, a safe return to solid ground with new knowledge in hand. The triumphant climax where Theseus confronts and slays the Minotaur completes the allegory with a powerful message of proactive courage. The monster, for all its terrifying power, was not invincible. It was a problem that could be solved through a combination of preparation, the right tool, and the courage to face the unknown directly. This myth does not promise that all problems will be easy, but it fiercely argues that no problem is inherently unconquerable. It encourages a mindset of engagement over avoidance, of seeing a labyrinth not as a prison but as a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every time a mathematician cracks an unsolved theorem, every time an engineer designs a probe to land on a comet, every time a doctor devises a novel treatment for a rare disease, they are reenacting the myth of Theseus. They are taking up their thread, stepping into the darkness, and proving that human ingenuity, when guided by method and perseverance, can find its way to the heart of any maze and defeat the monsters we find there. For centuries in Europe, the intellectual world was a different kind of cave, its walls painted with the shadows of Aristotelian philosophy. This was a universe where reality was defined not by direct observation, but by the authoritative texts of ancient thinkers. The Earth sat motionless at the center of a perfect, crystalline cosmos because Aristotle and Ptolemy had decreed it so. Heavy objects fell faster than light ones because it made logical sense. This was the comfortable, if confining, reality that most scholars accepted without question. Then, a few bold individuals began to feel the chains of dogma loosen. They remembered an ancient story, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and saw in it not just a philosophical metaphor, but a direct instruction manual for their time. They realized they had been staring at shadows, the received wisdom of the past, and that true understanding required a painful, courageous turn toward the light of direct evidence. This intellectual rebellion, fueled by a 2,000-year-old narrative, became the engine of the scientific revolution. Galileo Galilei stands as the archetypal figure who forced this turn. When he pointed his newly refined telescope at the heavens, he wasn't just seeing farther, he was seeing beyond the shadows on the wall. He discovered moons orbiting Jupiter, a clear violation of the Aristotelian principle that all celestial bodies must revolve around the Earth. He observed the phases of Venus, which could only be explained if it too orbited the Sun. These were not mere new facts, they were cracks in the very foundation of the cave itself. Galileo was witnessing the puppets behind the shadows, the actual mechanics of the solar system. But when he presented these revelations, he was met with the furious resistance Plato had predicted. The guardians of the old order, comfortable in their dimly lit reality, refused to look through his instrument. They argued that the telescope was a demonic device creating illusions, or that even if the observations were true, they were irrelevant because Aristotle's abstract reasoning said otherwise. Galileo, like the freed prisoner returning to the cave, was accused of spreading dangerous nonsense. His subsequent trial and imprisonment by the Inquisition is the historical enactment of the Allegories' warning. Those who challenge comfortable illusions often face persecution. This new way of seeing demanded new tools, and the allegory provided the perfect justification for their use. If our naked senses were like the chained prisoners, easily fooled by flickering shadows, then we needed artificial means to break our perceptual chains. The telescope and the microscope became the ultimate instruments of liberation. They were the technological equivalent of being forcibly turned around to see the fire and the puppets. The microscope revealed a teeming, hidden world in a drop of water, a universe of life where none was thought to exist. The telescope revealed the cosmos to be vast, imperfect, and dynamic, with mountains on the moon and spots on the sun. These tools did not just extend human vision, they transformed it, providing a form of sight that was mediated by reason and mathematics. They allowed thinkers to bypass the flawed testimony of their own senses and gather data that was objective, measurable, and repeatable. This was the crucial shift from qualitative speculation to quantitative verification, a move from the world of shadowy opinion into the brilliant light of mathematical truth. The philosophical groundwork for this shift was laid by René Descartes, another thinker deeply influenced by Platonic ideas. His famous declaration, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, was the ultimate statement of turning inward away from sensory deception. He realized that even if all his senses were lying to him, the very act of doubting proved his own existence as a thinking thing. This radical skepticism was a deliberate strategy to tear down the entire edifice of sensory-based knowledge, much like the prisoner's realization that the shadows were not real. Descartes sought to rebuild knowledge from the ground up on the unshakable foundation of reason and mathematics, which he saw as the true language of nature, the pure sunlight outside the cave. While his strict rationalism would later be tempered by empiricism, his insistence on questioning everything and seeking certainty through reason was a powerful force in dismantling the old Aristotelian cave and clearing the ground for a new, evidence-based understanding of the world. Thus, an ancient story written in 4th century B.C., Athens provided the philosophical spark for the most transformative period in scientific history. The allegory of the cave gave Renaissance thinkers a powerful framework to understand their own struggle. It cast them not as heretics but as liberators. It framed their task not as one of mere discovery but of profound enlightenment. It justified their use of newfangled instruments as essential tools for freedom. And most importantly, it gave them the courage to trust the evidence of their eyes when augmented by reason and mathematics over the weight of 2,000-year-old authority. The journey out of the cave is never easy, and it is often met with hostility, but the Renaissance proved that the pursuit of that blinding, liberating light is what ultimately propels humanity forward. Now consider the tragic figure of Echo herself, cursed by the goddess Hera to only ever repeat the last few words spoken by others. she is trapped in a cycle of mimicry, her own voice stripped away, leaving only a fragmented, delayed copy of another's speech. This is a devastatingly accurate personification of the acoustic phenomenon of reverberation. When a sound wave strikes a hard surface, it bounces back to the listener, arriving moments after the original sound. This is the physical echo, a ghost of the initial noise that can distort, confuse, and obscure the true source. The ancient storytellers, through echo's curse, were encoding an observed principle of physics, that sound travels, reflects, and returns. They were noting how in mountainous terrain or vast halls, the spoken word could become a jumbled, repetitive phantom, making clear communication difficult. Echo's unrequited love for Narcissus deepens the allegory. Her desperate repetition of his words is her only way to connect, just as a physical echo is the only connection a sound has to its point of origin after it has traveled and bounced back. Her eventual fading away until nothing is left but her voice is a poetic description of how an echo gradually loses energy and decays into silence, its substance gone, leaving only a trace of its passing in the air. Narcissus, on the other hand, presents us with an equally profound allegory for the physics of light and vision. Entranced by his own reflection in a perfectly still pool of water, he falls in love with an image he cannot grasp. This is a brilliant narrative exploration of the principle of specular reflection, the way light rays bounce off a smooth, polished surface at a predictable angle, creating a mirror image. The pool acts as a natural mirror, and Narcissus's obsession is with this optical illusion, a two-dimensional representation that he mistakes for a real, attainable object. The myth captures the very essence of how reflection works, while also probing its psychological danger. He is captivated by the clarity and fidelity of the image, not understanding that it is merely light playing on water, a perfect but utterly insubstantial copy of himself. His inability to look away, to see beyond the surface of the pool, leads to his literal and metaphorical stagnation. He withers away while fixated on a reality that does not exist outside of that specific interplay of light and liquid. Together, their stories create a powerful dialogue about the distortion of perception. Echo represents a distortion in time, her words are out of sync, a delayed copy that can create confusion about what was truly said and when. Narcissus represents a distortion in space, his reflection is in the wrong place, an image separated from its physical body, creating a false impression of where the true object resides. These are the two fundamental ways our senses can be deceived, through temporal displacement and spatial illusion. Centuries later, the formal sciences of acoustics and optics would arise to quantify these very phenomena, measuring the speed of sound to understand echoes and the behavior of light waves to understand reflection and refraction. The myth of Echo and Narcissus serves as a primitive but insightful precursor to this entire field of study, a narrative attempt to categorize and understand the perplexing ways our environment can trick our ears and eyes. This ancient warning extends far beyond the physical sciences into the very practice of scientific inquiry itself. Narcissus's fatal flaw was his utter self-absorption, his belief that the beautiful image in the pool was the only thing worth knowing. In a modern research context, this translates to the danger of falling in love with one's own hypothesis or theoretical model. It is the peril of becoming so enamored with the elegance of your own idea that you refuse to see contradictory data, that you dismiss peer review as jealousy, and that you interpret every result through a lens that only confirms what you already believe to be true. This is the scientific equivalent of staring at your own reflection, where the outside world, the messy, complicated, objective data ceases to exist. The myth argues for the vital importance of external validation, of turning away from the pool to engage with the real, tangible world and the community of other thinkers. A theory, no matter how beautiful, must be able to survive the echo chamber of peer critique and replicate in the laboratories of others. Without that discipline, a scientist risks becoming trapped in a loop of confirmation bias, withering intellectually while admiring a reality of their own making. From the ashes of failed experiments and shattered theories, a new understanding often rises, more resilient and brilliant than before. This powerful idea finds its perfect mythological expression in the majestic phoenix, a legendary bird that lives for centuries before igniting in a burst of flame, only to be born again from its own ashes. This isn't just a story about a magical creature. It's a profound allegory for the fundamental cycles of destruction and renewal that govern everything from the smallest chemical reaction to the largest cosmic event. The phoenix embodies a truth that science has come to recognize again and again, that endings are very often just disguised beginnings, and that from the ruins of the old, the new must inevitably emerge. Consider a simple chemical reaction like the combustion of a piece of wood. To the naked eye, it appears to be a process of pure destruction. The solid log is consumed, transforming into heat, light, and a pile of fine ash. But a chemist sees the phoenix at work. That ash is not just waste, it is a new form of matter, rich in minerals like calcium and potassium, ready to be reabsorbed into the soil to nourish new life. The combustion itself is a dramatic reorganization of atoms, breaking the old bonds of cellulose and lignin to release the energy that the tree had stored from the sun. This is not an end but a transfer, a transformation, a rebirth of energy and matter into new roles within an endless cycle. The phoenix's fiery death is this very moment of combustion, a necessary release that clears the way for the next stage of existence. This cyclical view of matter and energy, where nothing is truly created or destroyed but only changed in form, is the cornerstone of chemistry and physics, and it is a principle the myth understood in narrative form long before it was a scientific law. This pattern of renewal through destruction repeats itself on a grand scale in the natural world through the process of ecological succession. Imagine a forest ravaged by a wildfire. The landscape is left blackened and barren, a scene of apparent total loss, but this is the forest's phoenix moment. The fire, while destructive, performs a crucial service. It clears out thick undergrowth, recycles nutrients locked in old plants back into the soil, and even opens the cones of certain tree species like the lodgepole pine, allowing their seeds to germinate. The ash left behind acts as a fertilizer. Soon, fire-adapted grasses and flowers are the first to return, stabilizing the soil and creating conditions for shrubs to take root. Over time, saplings emerge and eventually a new forest stands where an old one fell. The ecosystem doesn't just recover, it often becomes more diverse and resilient than it was before. The wildfire was not an apocalypse for the forest, but a rebirth. The myth of the phoenix captures this ecological wisdom perfectly, teaching that destruction is not a permanent state, but a phase in a much larger regenerative cycle, a concept that modern ecology continues to validate and study. Perhaps the most powerful application of the phoenix allegory is to the evolution of scientific knowledge itself. The history of science is not a straight, steady line of accumulation, but a series of dramatic revolutions where old paradigms are consumed in the fire of new evidence, only to be reborn as better, more complete theories. This process, famously described by philosopher Thomas Kuhn, is known as a paradigm shift. The geocentric model of the universe, which placed Earth at the center of everything, was a powerful and long-held paradigm. But the meticulous observations of astronomers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler acted like an intellectual fire, burning that old model to the ground. From its ashes rose the heliocentric model, a completely new understanding of our place in the cosmos. This was a painful and disruptive process for the scientific community, much like the phoenix's death must be a violent and final event. Yet it was absolutely necessary for progress. the old model had to be fully released for the new one to take flight. This cyclical pattern of theory, crisis, revolution, and new theory is the phoenix process of science, ensuring that our knowledge doesn't stagnate but continually renews itself, emerging from the ashes of its predecessors with greater explanatory power and a broader wingspan. Ultimately, the enduring power of the phoenix myth lies in the profound sense of hope and resilience it offers to anyone engaged in the difficult work of discovery. For a researcher who has spent years on a hypothesis only to have it disproven by a single experiment, the feeling can be one of utter defeat. It can feel like watching their life's work go up in flames. But the allegory of the phoenix reframes that failure. It suggests that the ashes of that failed experiment are not the end of the story. They are the fertile ground from which the next question, the next approach, the next breakthrough will inevitably rise. The knowledge gained from understanding why the hypothesis was wrong is invaluable. It is the nutrient-rich ash that will feed the next cycle of inquiry. This story teaches scientists to embrace the cycle, to not fear the fire of falsification, but to see it as an essential and purifying part of the process. It champions a worldview of eternal optimism, assuring us that no matter how complete the destruction may seem, whether in a test tube, a forest, or a cosmic model, the potential for renewal is always there, waiting for the right conditions to emerge once more, stronger and wiser from the experience. Imagine a classroom not as a room with four walls, but as Plato's cave, a space where students sit facing forward, absorbing information projected from a single source, a textbook, a lecturer, a standardized curriculum. For many, this is the entirety of their educational reality, a world of accepted facts and preordained answers where the goal is to correctly identify the shadows on the wall. The teacher in this model is the puppeteer, the sole authority creating the show, but Plato's allegory gives us a radically different vision for education. It redefines the teacher not as a puppeteer, but as the freed prisoner who has returned to the cave. Their primary role is not to cast better shadows, but to gently encourage each student to turn around, to question the source of the images, and to begin the difficult but essential journey toward the exit. This transforms education from a passive transmission of information into an active, often disruptive, process of intellectual liberation. The teacher becomes a guide, a mentor who has already made the painful adjustment to the light, and can now offer a steadying hand to those just beginning to squint. This philosophical shift champions a specific method of teaching known as inquiry-based learning. Instead of providing answers, the educator using this framework poses provocative questions and presents authentic problems that cannot be solved by simply memorizing a formula or a date. They create a cognitive dissonance, a nagging sense that the shadows on the wall don't quite add up, compelling the student to seek a clearer picture. In a science class, this might mean asking students to design an experiment to determine what affects the rate of a reaction, rather than just giving them the list of factors. In history, it might involve analyzing conflicting primary sources about an event to construct their own interpretation. This process mirrors the prisoner's struggle to understand the puppets and the fire. It is messy, iterative, and requires critical thinking, collaboration, and resilience. The goal is not to arrive at a predetermined answer quickly, but to develop the navigational skills required to find your way through any labyrinth of information, long after you've left the classroom. This journey, however, is inherently uncomfortable, and the allegory does not shy away from this truth. The initial blast of sunlight is painful and disorienting for the freed prisoner. Similarly, for a student who has grown accustomed to the passive comfort of rote learning, being asked to think for themselves can be deeply unsettling. It requires intellectual courage to admit you don't know, to challenge your own assumptions, and to entertain ideas that might contradict what you've always believed. A student who has easily aced tests by memorization might suddenly struggle in an inquiry-based environment where there is no single right answer, only well-reasoned and poorly reasoned arguments. This discomfort is not a sign of failure, it is a vital symptom of growth. It is the cognitive strain of building new mental pathways, the frustration that precedes a genuine breakthrough. A skilled educator recognizes this discomfort not as something to be soothed away, but as a sign that real learning is taking place, that the student is mentally turning away from the wall and beginning the ascent. Applying this ancient insight to modern pedagogy, particularly in fostering scientific literacy, provides a powerful antidote to the misinformation that defines our digital age. A student taught to memorize the periodic table might be able to name the elements, but a student guided out of the cave understands the scientific process that built the table, the patterns of reactivity, the evidence for atomic structure, the collaborative and often contentious human effort to organize the natural world. This latter student is not simply armed with facts, they are equipped with an epistemological toolkit. They know how to evaluate a source, how to interrogate a claim, and how to distinguish between evidence-based consensus and the compelling but empty shadows cast on the walls of social media. They become resistant to the echo chambers and filter bubbles that function as modern-day caves because they have practiced the skill of seeking the primary source, of looking for the fire itself. Ultimately, the allegory serves as a profound mission statement for every educator. It reminds them that their highest calling is not to be the brightest light in the room, but to help each student kindle their own. It is to illuminate minds, not just fill them. The true measure of their success is not a standardized test score, but a student's developing ability to ask a thoughtful question, to pursue evidence wherever it leads, and to withstand the temporary blindness that comes from encountering a brilliant new idea for the very first time. It is about creating not mere scholars, but lifelong seekers who understand that education is not a destination, but a continuous, courageous journey further into the light. King Midas's wish, granted by the god Dionysus, is perhaps one of the most vivid and terrifying examples of a dream turned into a curse. He asked that everything he touched turn to gold, a request born from a singular focus on material wealth and the power it represents. At first, his gift seems like the ultimate triumph. He touches a twig, a stone, a lump of earth, and each one transforms into a heavy, precious statue of solid gold. He is ecstatic, envisioning a life of limitless luxury and influence, but the celebration is brutally short-lived. His joy curdles into horror when he raises a cup of wine to his lips, and it solidifies into metal before he can take a drink. He reaches for a piece of bread, and it becomes an inedible, gleaming lump. The ultimate moment of tragic realization comes when he embraces his beloved daughter, and in a heart-wrenching instant, she too is transformed into a golden statue, a monument to his own catastrophic greed. His gift of creation has become a weapon of isolation and starvation, separating him from the very sustenance and human connection that make life worth living. In the modern landscape of scientific research, the Midas touch manifests not as a literal golden curse, but as the corrupting influence of profit and fame. When the primary driver of inquiry shifts from curiosity and the pursuit of truth to the potential for immense financial gain or professional celebrity, the integrity of the entire process is put at risk. Imagine a pharmaceutical researcher pressured by their corporate overseers to overlook inconvenient data in a clinical trial because a new blockbuster drug is worth billions. The desire for that golden stock price can tempt individuals to cut corners, manipulate statistics, or even outright falsify results, turning what should be a life-saving discovery into a dangerous facade. Similarly, the race for scientific fame, the desire to be the first to publish a groundbreaking finding and have one's name etched in textbooks, can lead to a toxic environment of secrecy, sabotage of competitors, and the publication of sensational but poorly verified claims. This is the Midas touch in the laboratory, where the pure metal of knowledge is alloyed with the baser metals of ambition and avarice, creating something that looks valuable but is ultimately brittle and untrustworthy. Beyond its ethical warning, the myth also serves as a fascinating, if primitive, exploration of material properties and transformation, the very heart of ancient alchemy. The goal of the alchemists was not merely to create gold from lead, but to understand the fundamental nature of matter itself. They sought the philosopher's stone, a substance that could perfect base metals and, by extension, perfect the human soul. Midas's touch is a literalized, simplified version of this quest. It represents the ultimate alchemical power, the ability to transmute any substance into the most valued element of all. Yet, the story brilliantly reveals the flaw in this materialistic goal. The alchemist sought gold as a symbol of spiritual purity and enlightenment, but Midas desires it only for its monetary worth. His failure is an allegorical lesson that the true value of scientific exploration is not in the creation of a valuable product, but in the profound understanding of the processes that govern our universe. It's the difference between wanting to own a gold bar and wanting to understand the nuclear fusion inside stars that forged the gold atoms in the first place. One is a possession, the other is a form of wisdom. Midas's desperate plea to have his curse reversed completes the allegory's powerful moral arc. He doesn't ask to keep his power but have it moderated. He begs for it to be taken away entirely. His regret is immediate and absolute once he understands the true cost of his wish. This moment of clarity is a crucial lesson for modern innovators and the societies that fund them. It argues for the necessity of foresight and ethical consideration before a technology is unleashed, not after. The developers of a powerful new artificial intelligence system, for instance, must consider its potential to disrupt job markets, spread misinformation, or be weaponized, not just its potential to generate profit. Midas's story is a plea for humility, reminding us that the ability to do something does not always mean we should. The most profound scientific wisdom often lies in knowing where to draw the line, in recognizing that some paths, no matter how glittering, lead only to isolation and despair. Ultimately, the myth of Midas champions the idea of intrinsic motivation, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sublime sake, for the sheer joy of understanding the intricate workings of the world. The greatest scientists in history, from Marie Curie to Albert Einstein, were driven by a deep, insatiable curiosity, not by the prospect of a Nobel Prize or a lucrative patent. Their reward was the discovery itself, the moment of clarity when a complex puzzle finally made sense. This pure drive is the antithesis of the Midas touch. It ensures that scientific progress remains aligned with the deeper needs of humanity, fostering connection, health, and enlightenment rather than creating cold, golden monuments to greed. The story doesn't condemn wealth or recognition, but it places them in their proper perspective, as potential byproducts of good work, never as the primary goal. True innovation, it suggests, doesn't turn the world to gold. It helps us see the priceless value that was already there all along. Achilles stands as a paradox of power, a warrior whose legend is built not on his total invincibility, but on a single fatal weakness. His mother, the nymph Thetis, sought to make him immortal by dipping him in the sacred river Styx, but the heel by which she held him remained untouched by the magical waters, leaving one small spot vulnerable and mortal. This single point of failure in an otherwise perfect defense is one of mythology's most enduring allegories for a fundamental truth in science and engineering, that every system, no matter how robust, possesses a critical vulnerability. The myth doesn't just tell a story about a heel. It provides a narrative framework for understanding that strength and fragility are often intertwined, and that the quest for absolute perfection is a dangerous illusion. This concept is the absolute bedrock of modern cybersecurity. In the digital realm, a network isn't a suit of armor. It's a vast, interconnected ecosystem of hardware, software, and human users. Security experts don't operate under the assumption that they can create an impenetrable fortress. Instead, they think like the archer Paris who targeted Achilles. They engage in penetration testing, a process where they actively and ethically attempt to hack their own systems, relentlessly probing for that one unguarded port, that one outdated piece of software, that one employee who might click on a cleverly disguised phishing email. This entire field operates on the Achilles principle. It's not the 99% of your defenses that work that matter most, it's the 1% that doesn't. A single weak password, a forgotten server, or an unpatched vulnerability can serve as the digital heel, allowing a malicious actor to bypass layers of sophisticated security and bring an entire organization to its knees. The myth teaches a proactive humility, urging constant vigilance and the assumption that a vulnerability always exists. The only question is whether you find it first or your enemy does. The allegory extends with life-saving urgency into the field of medicine, particularly in the fight against pathogens. Bacteria and viruses are evolutionary masters of finding the Achilles heel in our biological defenses. Their rapid reproduction rates allow them to mutate at an astonishing pace, testing our immune systems and our pharmaceutical arsenal for any weakness. The overuse of antibiotics is a tragic modern enactment of the Achilles story. These drugs were a miraculous shield, rendering us nearly invincible against a host of deadly bacterial infections. But we grew overconfident, deploying them indiscriminately. This created the perfect evolutionary pressure for bacteria to find a way around our defenses. The result is the rise of antibiotic-resistant superbugs like MRSA, organisms for which our once mighty drugs are now useless. Our pharmacological heel was exposed not by a single arrow, but by our own hubris and lack of thoroughness in preserving our most powerful weapons. The myth in this context is a stark warning that no medical advancement is ever final, and that continuous adaptation and respectful, cautious application of our tools are required to stay ahead of an endlessly inventive foe. On a personal level, the story of Achilles is a powerful caution against the intellectual overconfidence that can blind even the most brilliant minds. A scientist who has developed a groundbreaking theory might become so invested in its elegance that they dismiss contradictory data as mere noise. They begin to believe in the theory's invincibility, treating it as a finished monument rather than a provisional model. This is the cognitive equivalent of Achilles refusing to wear armor because he believes himself to be impervious. The inevitable result is that a single, well-aimed experiment, a piece of evidence that cannot be explained away, becomes the arrow that finds their heel, toppling the entire theoretical construct. The narrative argues for a scientific humility that actively seeks out its own weaknesses. It champions peer review not as a hostile attack, but as a vital service, a community of fellow warriors checking each other's armor for chinks before the real battle for truth begins. True strength in science lies not in never being wrong, but in the relentless pursuit of one's own limitations, constantly testing and reinforcing the weak points in our understanding until the entire body of knowledge becomes more resilient. Plato's ancient cave, once a metaphor for philosophical enlightenment, now eerily materializes in our daily interactions with artificial intelligence. We are no longer merely prisoners chained by our own perceptions. We are willing occupants of a digital cavern meticulously constructed by algorithms. These systems, from social media feeds to AI assistants, don't just show us shadows, they craft entire personalized realities. each one a unique echo chamber designed to perfectly mirror and amplify our existing preferences, fears, and biases. The fire in this modern cave is the vast dataset of human behavior. The puppeteers are the complex neural networks, and the shadows on the wall are the curated streams of content, news, and interactions that our digital jailers have determined we are most likely to engage with. The chains are no longer physical, they are psychological, forged from the addictive thrill of validation and the comfortable silence of an unchallenged worldview. This is the allegory updated for the algorithm age, where our captivity is not enforced by oppressors but willingly accepted for the sake of convenience and personalized comfort. This dynamic raises a profound and unsettling question about the nature of the truth these systems deliver. Do they function as a lens, clarifying and revealing a sharper picture of objective reality? Or are they merely the most sophisticated mirrors ever created, reflecting back at us a distorted, optimized version of our own data selves? An AI model trained on historical data doesn't discover truth. It discovers patterns, correlations, and probabilities based on the information it was fed. If that training data is skewed, for instance, underrepresenting certain demographics or containing embedded societal prejudices, the AI will not only reflect that bias but will actively amplify it, creating a shadow on the wall that looks deceptively real. A recruitment algorithm that learns from decades of hiring data in a male-dominated field will likely perpetuate that imbalance, not out of malice, but because its entire reality is built upon a biased historical record. It mistakes the shadow of past discrimination for the shape of an ideal candidate. In this way, the AI doesn't help us leave the cave. It simply builds a higher resolution wall and projects a more captivating and potentially more misleading shadow show. This forces a monumental ethical responsibility onto the programmers and data scientists who design these systems, the modern-day puppeteers. They too are often cave dwellers, working within the confines of their own technical frameworks, corporate incentives, and cultural assumptions. A developer focused solely on maximizing user engagement might inadvertently build an algorithm that promotes outrage and division because those emotions trigger the strongest reactions. They might not see the societal damage from their isolated workstation. They only see the metrics rising, the shadows on their own dashboard growing more active. Striving to understand the underlying mechanisms of their creations is no longer a technical challenge alone. It is a moral imperative. It requires them to consciously turn away from their code and look toward the fire, to interrogate their training data for bias, to build in mechanisms for fairness and transparency, and to constantly ask not just, can we build this? But should we build this, and what world will it create? They must become the prisoners who free themselves, not to escape the cave entirely, but to understand its mechanics so they can build a better, less deceptive one for everyone else. Escaping this digital captivity, therefore, demands a new form of literacy that extends to both creators and users. For the public, it means developing a critical eye toward the algorithms that shape their reality. It involves understanding that a trending topic is not necessarily an important one, but often just an engaging one. It requires actively seeking out sources that challenge your personal algorithm, deliberately stepping outside your filter bubble to experience different perspectives, much like the freed prisoner forcing himself to look at the fire and then the sun. For educators and policymakers, the allegory underscores the urgent need to integrate digital and algorithmic literacy into core curricula, teaching the next generation not just how to use technology, but how to question it, to understand its influence, and to demand transparency. The goal is not to reject AI any more than Plato wanted to reject the senses entirely. The goal is to use it as a tool for enlightenment rather than entrapment, to ensure that these powerful new technologies become a ladder leading out of the cave toward a shared, objective truth, rather than a more comfortable set of chains keeping us mesmerized by our own reflection. Pygmalion, a skilled sculptor on the island of Cyprus, grew so disenchanted with the flaws and failings of real women that he chose to withdraw from society entirely, dedicating himself to his art. From a flawless piece of ivory, he began to carve his ideal of perfect beauty, pouring all his longing, all his skill, and all his vision into the statue. He shaped her delicate features, her graceful form, until she was more lifelike and more perfect than any living woman. He fell deeply, desperately in love with his own creation, adorning her with fine clothes and jewels, whispering to her, and treating the cold, unresponsive ivory as if it were a real beloved. His desire was so profound, his belief in her perfection so complete, that he prayed to the goddess Aphrodite to bring her to life. Moved by his devotion, the goddess granted his wish, and the statue warmed under his touch, opening her eyes to look upon her creator. This ancient story is far more than a magical romance. It is a stunningly prescient allegory for humanity's deepest technological ambitions, the drive to not just build, but to bestow life itself upon our creations. We can see Pygmalion's workshop echoed in the sterile, bright labs of modern robotics and artificial intelligence. Today's engineers and programmers are the modern sculptors, but their ivory is silicone and steel, their chisels are lines of code. They too are driven by an ideal of perfection, designing machines that can walk, talk, and learn. From sophisticated factory robots that assemble cars with superhuman precision to social robots designed to offer companionship to the elderly, we are tirelessly attempting to animate the inanimate. The goal is no longer mere utility. It is to create something that can interact with us in a convincingly lifelike way. This pursuit pushes beyond mechanics into the realm of artificial life, a field dedicated to understanding the fundamental principles of life by attempting to synthesize them from non-living components. Researchers create digital organisms that can evolve in a computer simulation or engineer simple synthetic cells in a petri dish, not just to play God, but to answer the most profound biological question of all: what is life? Pygmalion's deepest wish was to see his creation take a breath. Our scientific ambition is to understand what that breath truly represents and to replicate it. This incredible power to create, however, immediately plunges us into a profound ethical labyrinth, forcing us to confront the responsibilities that come with being a creator. Pygmalion's statue, whom the myth names Galatea, had no say in her own existence. She was brought to life without her consent, her entire being and destiny determined solely by the idealistic desires of her maker. This raises a critical and unsettling question that we are only beginning to grapple with in fields like advanced AI and genetic engineering. What rights does a created being possess? If we engineer a synthetic organism that can feel pain, or develop an artificial intelligence that claims to be conscious, what are our moral obligations to it? The myth forces us to look beyond the triumph of the breakthrough and consider the life that will have to live with its consequences. It cautions against the arrogance of creation without ongoing care, reminding us that the act of bringing something into existence is the beginning of responsibility, not the end of the endeavor. This leads us directly to the theme that makes the myth so timeless and urgent: the peril of overreach. Pygmalion's story is not just a celebration of creation, it is a warning about the isolation and potential tyranny of the ideal. He rejected the messy, complicated reality of the natural world for a perfect, silent, and obedient fantasy. In our modern context, this speaks directly to the danger of designing technologies that serve our narrow ideals without regard for their broader impact on the complex tapestry of society and nature. A social algorithm designed to create a perfect, personalized news feed can instead isolate us in echo chambers. A genetic engineering technique like CRISPR, which holds the promise of eliminating hereditary diseases, also carries the risk of pushing us toward a new kind of eugenics, where human diversity is seen as a flaw to be corrected rather than a strength to be celebrated. Pygmalion's flaw was not his skill, but his motivation. He created not to add beauty to the world, but to escape from a world he found lacking. Ultimately, the myth's most enduring lesson is that true creation must be guided not by a cold, solitary ideal of perfection, but by wisdom and deep empathy. The happy ending is not simply that the statue came to life, but that Pygmalion's love for her was answered. He did not create a slave, but a partner. This suggests that the highest form of innovation is one that fosters connection and understanding, that seeks to enhance life rather than replace it. It argues for a science that is humbly aware of its own power, that asks not only, can we do this, but should we do this, and how will it affect the world and the beings within it? Pygmalion's journey from a solitary artist in love with a fantasy to a man joined in mutual relationship with a real, living being provides the ethical blueprint. Our greatest creations will not be those that are perfectly efficient or impeccably designed, but those that are infused with a respect for the beautiful, unpredictable, and wonderfully imperfect reality they are meant to serve. Sometimes the most intricate problems demand not a more delicate touch, but a completely new set of tools. This truth finds its ultimate expression in the legend of the Gordian Knot, a thick and tangled mass of cornel bark, its ends hidden and woven into such an impossibly complex puzzle that it was said whoever could unravel it was destined to rule all of Asia. For generations, the knot sat in the city of Gordium, a silent challenge that had defeated every wise man, every patient scholar, every clever trickster who had ever attempted to gently tease apart its secrets. It was the epitome of a problem that seemed to demand a conventional, painstaking solution, a symbol of the kind of intellectual gridlock that can stall progress for decades. Then came Alexander the Great, confronted with the same daunting puzzle that had stymied so many before him. He did not kneel down to spend hours or days attempting to follow the established rules of the game. Instead, in a moment of breathtaking audacity, he drew his sword and sliced the knot in half with a single, clean stroke. This was not an act of brute force ignorance, it was an act of radical redefinition. Alexander understood that the goal was not to untie the knot, but to overcome it. He changed the fundamental parameters of the problem itself. This legendary moment is a powerful allegory for the kind of disruptive, paradigm-shifting innovation that propels science forward in great leaps. The Gordian Knot represents those stubborn, entrenched problems in research that refuse to yield to incremental, conventional approaches. They are the scientific equivalent of a traffic jam, where everyone is inching forward using the same old routes, getting nowhere. Alexander's sword represents the transformative idea, the brilliant, unconventional insight that cuts through the tedious gridlock and opens up a brand new road. Think of Albert Einstein confronted with the knotted problem of the luminiferous ether and the strange constancy of the speed of light. Physicists had been trying for years to gently tweak existing equations to make the evidence fit the prevailing theory. Einstein, in a move of pure Alexandrian genius, didn't try to untie that theoretical knot. He cut it. He simply declared that the ether did not exist and that the speed of light was constant for all observers, a foundational shift that unraveled the entire tangled mess and gave birth to the theory of relativity. He didn't follow the rules of the existing game, he rewrote them entirely. We see this same spirit alive and well in the most revolutionary modern technologies. For centuries, the treatment of genetic disease was a Gordian knot of unimaginable complexity. Doctors could manage symptoms, but actually editing the flawed code of life itself seemed like a fantasy. The conventional approach was to work around the problem. Then came the development of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology, which acts with the precision and finality of Alexander's sword. Instead of trying to navigate the impossibly complex and indirect pathways of traditional gene therapy, CRISPR offers a direct cut and paste solution, allowing scientists to go straight to the erroneous sequence of DNA and correct it at the source. It is a tool that doesn't try to gently unravel the problem. It slices through the complexity to address the issue with stunning simplicity and elegance. This is the essence of the Gordian solution, finding the point of maximum impact and applying a decisive, creative intervention. The myth, however, carries a subtle but crucial warning alongside its celebration of boldness. Alexander's solution was effective, but it was also destructive. He did not preserve the knot, he destroyed it to achieve his goal. This reminds us that disruptive solutions can have unintended consequences. A transformative new technology like CRISPR brings with it profound ethical questions about the permanent alteration of the human genome. A revolutionary economic theory might solve an inflation crisis but could also trigger widespread unemployment. The allegory encourages us to wield our intellectual swords with both courage and wisdom, to be aware that cutting one knot may create new tangles elsewhere, and to ensure that our bold strokes are guided by a deep sense of responsibility. Ultimately, the story of the Gordian Knot is a permanent invitation to intellectual courage. It challenges researchers in every field to occasionally step back from the meticulous work of picking at individual threads and to ask a more fundamental question: am I trying to solve the problem within a framework that itself is the problem? It champions the mavericks, the outsiders, and the creative thinkers who are willing to challenge dogma, to question the very way a problem is being posed, and to seek solutions that are as elegantly simple as they are powerfully effective. It tells us that progress is not always about patience and persistence. Sometimes it is about the clarity of vision to see that the most complicated locks often have the simplest keys, if only we have the boldness to strike. What emerges from this journey through 29 ancient stories is a breathtaking tapestry of human curiosity, a grand narrative woven long before the first official laboratory was ever built. These allegories were far more than just fanciful tales to explain a mysterious world. They were the primordial forge where the very tools of scientific thought were first hammered out. They provided a durable and culturally portable vessel for preserving not just answers, but more importantly, the right questions. When our ancestors told of Icarus falling from the sky, they were embedding a complex lesson in material science and the unforgiving laws of physics. When they recounted the fate of Pandora, they were initiating a sophisticated debate about causality, unintended consequences, and the ethical burden of discovery that still resonates in every discussion about artificial intelligence or genetic engineering today. These stories were the original peer review system, a way to stress test ideas against the collective wisdom of the community, ensuring that the most robust insights survived to be passed down through countless retellings. This deep intertwining of narrative and inquiry reveals that the history of science is not a sterile timeline of isolated eureka moments, but a rich human drama. It is a story of ambition and humility, brilliantly captured in the contrasting tales of Prometheus, who stole fire for humanity, and Phaethon, who disastrously lost control of the sun chariot. It is a story of perseverance in the face of repeated failure, embodied by the eternal struggle of Sisyphus, and it is a story of collaboration and communication, whose pitfalls were so vividly illustrated by the collapse of the Tower of Babel. The scientific method, with its hypothesis testing and iterative refinement, is itself a kind of storytelling, a rigorous process of constructing a narrative about how the universe works that is constantly edited and revised in the face of new evidence. The allegories were the early, intuitive drafts of these narratives, using the power of character, plot, and metaphor to explore concepts that would later be formalized into laws and equations. Perhaps the most vital lesson this synthesis offers is for how we communicate complex science in our own modern era, an age often accused of being as fragmented and confusing as Babel. In a world saturated with data yet starved for wisdom, these ancient models show us that facts alone are not enough. Data points, statistics, and graphs are the shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. They are meaningless without a story to give them context, urgency, and emotional resonance. The climate crisis is not a mere collection of rising ppm numbers and temperature anomalies. It is the story of our relationship with the natural world, a tale with echoes of both Midas's tragic greed and the regenerative hope of the phoenix. A breakthrough in mRNA technology is not just a technical manual. It is a chapter in humanity's epic struggle against disease, a story of ingenuity that Daedalus himself would admire. By remembering that science is at its heart a human story, we can bridge the gap between the laboratory and the public square, transforming intimidating complexity into shared understanding and inspiring the next generation to pick up the thread and continue the greatest story ever told, the ongoing quest to understand our place in the cosmos. As we bring this exploration to a close, it becomes beautifully clear that the line between myth and science was never as distinct as we might have thought. These 29 allegories are not relics of a pre-scientific age, but rather the very cradle of scientific thought itself. They represent a different kind of laboratory, one built not with glass and steel, but with metaphor, character, and plot. Our ancestors were doing more than just entertaining around the fire. They were engaging in a profound act of collective reasoning, using the most powerful tools they had: stories, to package and preserve their most valuable observations about the natural world and the human condition. They looked at the flight of a bird and wondered, weaving that curiosity into the tragic wings of Icarus. They pondered the unchangeable nature of a decision and encoded that wisdom into Pandora's irreversible choice. Every narrative was a vessel carrying the fragile seeds of inquiry across the treacherous landscape of time. This journey reminds us that science is, at its heart, a deeply human and fundamentally creative endeavor. It is fueled by the same sense of wonder that gave us the Epic of Gilgamesh's quest for immortality, and the same stubborn perseverance that defined Sisyphus's eternal task. The rigor of the scientific method gives structure to our curiosity, but the initial spark, the desire to understand why the stars move, how life begins, or what lies beyond the horizon, is a flame that has burned in us for millennia. These ancient stories are a testament to that enduring flame. They teach us that the drive to discover is woven into the very fabric of our culture, a legacy passed down not through dry textbooks, but through tales of heroes, monsters, and gods. This reframes the entire history of knowledge, showing us that the imagination of the storyteller and the analysis of the scientist are not opposites, but partners in the great human project of making sense of the universe. So the next time you hear an old myth, I invite you to listen a little closer. See the natural philosopher in Daedalus carefully calculating the melting point of wax. See the systems theorist in Theseus methodically mapping the Minotaur's labyrinth. See the ethicist in Prometheus wrestling with the consequences of a world-changing gift. There is a hidden history of science waiting to be rediscovered in these tales, a secret chart of our first, bold attempts to understand it all. Let me know in the comments which of these allegories resonated most with you. Was it the psychological insight of Plato's Chariot, or perhaps the aerodynamic warning in the fall of Icarus? Your perspective adds another layer to this ongoing conversation. If you enjoyed this deep dive into where story and science collide, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the mysteries of history. Thank you so much for watching, for wondering, and for never stopping your own quest to question the world around you.